An experienced blacksmith suggestion, 2. Linked quest. Difficulty D. Having proven yourself through outstanding performance in previous quests, you've now been introduced by Tristan to a system crucial to every aspiring blacksmith, the technology tree. Tristan sees great potential in you. Although the task ahead surpasses your current skill level, he believes that with enough time and perseverance, you'll surprise him once again. Unlike earlier challenges, there is no time limit. This quest is about dedication and growth. Quest objective: forge a piece of equipment, 0/1. Rewards: plus 80 affinity with Tristan, 5,000 XP, 25 technology points, a set of common gray blueprints. Failure penalty: minus 100 affinity with Tristan, minus 2 levels. Questline terminated. Tristan tilted his head, slightly puzzled. Something wrong with the quest? He asked, noting Valyr's troubled expression. He had expected enthusiasm, maybe even excitement, but confusion? Valyr took a breath, calming himself. The quest itself isn't the issue, he replied. But don't you think this is too much too soon? Shouldn't there be a basic hammering task first? I haven't even held a hammer yet. I had that exact plan initially, Tristan admitted while heading to the furnace. As he knelt to light the fire, he continued, but considering how quickly you've completed my previous quests, I figure it might be a waste of your time. You've shown more promise than most beginners. That's why I'm skipping the basics, he added as flames flickered to life. Tossing firewood into the growing blaze, he turned back. Don't worry, this isn't a time trial. Take all the time you need. He gave Valyr a reassuring smile. So, up for the challenge. Or should I adjust the quest? Valyr muttered under his breath. Good thing I already know how to forge. Thankfully, Tristan didn't hear him. I'll do it, Valyr said aloud with a sigh. Challenge accepted. Good. Tristan laughed, moving to a nearby box and pulling out a bar of metal. He placed it on the anvil, then lifted it with tongs and pushed it into the furnace to heat. Have you unlocked the necessary advancements yet? Almost, Valyr replied. A moment later, a series of notifications appeared. Ding! You have unlocked Basic Fire Control LV.1, Basic Material Knowledge LV.1, Basic Equipment Knowledge LV.1, Basic Forging LV.1, Basic Enhancement LV.1. Intermediate advancements are currently sealed due to insufficient class rank. Passive skill gained: Basic Forging Mastery. Active skills gained: Basic Equipment Creation, Basic Equipment Modification, Basic Equipment Enhancement. Valyr chuckled quietly as he reviewed his new skills. Though all were still level 1, he felt a step closer to reaching rank 1. Feels like you're finally becoming a real blacksmith. Tristan said, noticing the laugh. I felt the same way when I unlocked those skills myself. Moments later, Tristan retrieved the heated metal and placed it on the anvil. Picking up his hammer, he began to work. Tang! A clear, rhythmic ring echoed through the smithy, the melody of metal taking shape. Hey Valyr, Tristan called out between strikes. Since this is your quest, want to watch me forge something from scratch? Might help you when you try. I'm free today. Let's do it, Valyr replied, stepping closer for a better view. As he watched, Valyr silently admired the precision in Tristan's movements. No wasted effort, just passion and experience in every strike. He's got real heart for the craft. First, you heat the metal until it's soft enough to shape, Tristan explained while working. Then hammer it into the form you want. Eventually, the metal cools and you need to reheat it. Repeat until done. That's the core of forging. For now, just focus on heating and hammering. We'll get into tempering and enhancements later. Tristan looked up. Once I'm done, want to give it a go? Sure, Valyr nodded. But out of curiosity, why are you making another weapon? Don't you already have enough? Well, yes, Tristan replied. But this one's a special request for Damien. He needs it for the upcoming Monster Tide. Valyr blinked. Wait, you know about the Monster Tide? Tristan looked at him like he'd just asked if fire was hot. Valyr, I'm a rank 2 class holder. Silence followed. After the awkward silence that lingered at the end of their conversation, the forge was filled only with the rhythmic ringing of metal meeting metal. The clamor of Tristan's hammer echoed through the smithy, occasionally interrupted by the crackle of the furnace. Valyr stood quietly by, observing Tristan's practiced movements with growing intrigue. At first, it wasn't clear what Tristan was crafting, only that he was gradually shaping the metal into a long, flattened form. But as the minutes ticked by and the structure became more refined, realization dawned on Valyr. A broadsword blade. Does Damien use broadswords? Valyr asked, his curiosity piqued. Tristan looked up with a slight grin. You haven't seen him fight, have you? Valyr shook his head. Then you're in for a show during the monster tide. Tristan chuckled, slipping the glowing blade back into the furnace. He's a beast with a broadsword. I've been around since before he became head of the village guard, and I can confidently say he's one of the best fighters here. He added, the only thing limiting him right now is that old blade of his, the one I made years ago, back when he was still a rank 1 rookie. Valor's eyes drifted back to the blade Tristan was shaping. It shimmered with potential. With this new one, I don't know what heights he'll reach, Tristan said with a satisfied grunt, his strikes now sharper and more deliberate. With a final swing, he stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow as he admired his work. Holding up the forged blade, the light caught its surface, revealing a faint gleam. He inspected it from multiple angles, nodding to himself before returning it to the furnace for tempering. Then he looked to Valyr. All right, that's it for me today. Your turn. Take a seat. Valyr froze for a moment. His mind raced as he sat down before the anvil, wondering if all the forging experience from his past life would resurface like muscle memory, just as it had during battle. He exhaled deeply, steadying himself, then reached out for the hammer Tristan had left for him. Analysis, Valyr whispered, curious about the tool he was about to use. Ding. Refined forging hammer, level 15. Rarity, rare. A forging hammer crafted from the finest metals in Astardo village. Infused with the passion and precision of a skilled blacksmith, it increases forging success rate by 7%. Remarks. You're not worthy to hold this. You made this yourself? Valyr asked, raising a brow after reading the description. Of course. Tristan gave a proud nod, still watching the blade in the furnace. Most blacksmiths craft their own tools, especially their hammers. Tristan then reached into a nearby box and tossed Valyr a small block of copper. Here's your material. Mold it however you like. Valyr caught it with ease and placed it on the anvil, but hesitated. Tristan, don't I need some kind of guide to follow? Nearly forgot. Tristan blinked, tapping into his interface. A moment later, a notification rang in Valor's mind. Ding! You have obtained the blueprint for Copper Dagger from Tristan Melfon. As you climb ranks, you can forge freely without blueprints, Tristan explained. But for now, they're essential. Think of them as guidelines, not rigid instructions. Go ahead, he gestured. I'll be keeping an eye on the blade. Nodding, Valyr grabbed a pair of tongs and placed the copper into the furnace. A few minutes later, he pulled it out, glowing a bright yellow-orange, and set it on the anvil. He gripped the hammer tightly. Tang! A sharp ring echoed through the smithy. Valor's first strike had landed. Tristan smiled faintly at the sound, until the sizzle of hot metal pulled his attention back to his own work. The broadsword blade had reached tempering temperature. He quickly quenched it in warm oil. PSSSSHHHH. While steam hissed from the quenching barrel, Valyr kept hammering. With each strike, his technique improved. His swings became smoother, more confident, as though something inside him had awakened. Memories surged forth. Techniques. Patterns. A rhythm. Tang. 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 The copper began to flatten, shaped with precision and control. Tristan glanced over and froze. What he expected to see was a beginner fumbling to shape a lump of metal. But instead, Valor's form was steady. Each strike was deliberate. His grip firm. His stance sure. He wasn't just hammering metal. He was forging with intent. Tristan stared, slack-jawed. Did I just meet a natural-born blacksmith?
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
As he continued to watch Valyr hammer away on the copper, Tristan's mouth went more and more agape from the shock he felt, wondering how a beginner like Valyr had such skill and finesse when it came to the hammer, considering how it was the latter's first time wielding one. Did I inadvertently come across a natural blacksmith? He could not help but think to himself. However, the more he watched Valyr work the metal in front of him as if it was child's play, the more certain he became of that thought. Although they were rare, natural blacksmiths weren't unheard of. Recalling his past where he was still an apprentice under a blacksmith, Tristan remembered a time where he had met with a person at around the same age as him, who was being touted as the future face of blacksmithing. Naturally, as he was still a young man, Tristan could not help but let his jealousy take over his rationality, eventually challenging that person into a duel on who could forge the better weapon. Because of that event, Tristan had been enlightened to the world of natural blacksmiths, people who seemed to have a natural talent for blacksmithing, as if it was their purpose in life to become one. Unsurprisingly, the person he had challenged was one of those natural blacksmiths, their final product being a weapon that was one rarity higher than what he had produced. Now having grown from that phase, Tristan could not help but feel giddy that he was going to become the teacher of a natural blacksmith, letting his mind wander about as he wondered how renowned Valyr's name would be in the years to come. Though, as he thought about it, there was also another possibility Valyr could be aside from a natural blacksmith. Thinking about this other possibility, Tristan's eyes could not help but darken as he thought. Either he's a natural, or he's just hiding all of the past experience he actually has on blacksmithing before deciding to learn under me. If Valyr were to hear what was going on in Tristan's mind at the moment, Valyr would probably tell him that he was somewhat correct, considering that he did have past experience in blacksmithing. In his past life, that is. Nevertheless, the more Tristan thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. The way he's wielding the hammer feels like he already has experience wielding it beforehand. On top of that, the way he's hammering the metal feels like there's purpose and intent behind each one. It doesn't feel erratic or anything. Eventually, he let out a light sigh. There's no reason for me to come to hasty conclusions. Now that I think about it, Valyr came to me with his technology tree still locked, so there's a higher chance he's a natural instead of being a fraud. Then again, who knows if that's really the case? I'll just have to find that out on my own. With that thought in mind, Tristan removed the blade from the barrel before inspecting it once more. Nodding in satisfaction at how the blade turned out, he placed it by the side for now, deciding to postpone sharpening the blade after Valyr was done with his attempt. Coincidentally, at that very moment, Valyr realized that he had gotten too engrossed in hammering the metal as he allowed his past experience to take over. Shifting the gear into manual, he slowed down his pace considerably, noticing that the metal before him had roughly taken on the shape of the dagger in the blueprint Tristan gave him, with some spots even showing detail not seen in the blueprint. I almost forgot this is supposed to be my first attempt at forging, Valyr thought, inwardly cursing at himself for getting engrossed. Though, not long after, he inwardly let out a sigh, recalling that it had been a long time since he had last forged something. In fact, the last time he had forged something was about 1.5 years before the final battle, which was more or less a reason as to why Valyr had become engrossed in forging out of nowhere. Although I could show that I definitely have the skills for it, the worst thing I can do is show that I can successfully forge something on my first attempt, he inwardly muttered, his hammering becoming more and more sloppy as time passed. If I do that, Tristan will definitely become suspicious. In fact, I think he already is. As he took a quick glance at Tristan, wondering if the latter was still in the process of tempering the blade he had forged, he instead saw Tristan staring at him intently, which could not help but make Valyr feel a little bit nervous. Thankfully, with a few deep breaths, he was able to calm his nerves down, allowing him to continue heating and hammering the metal before him, though at a much slower pace than before. Hey, Tristan, when Damien asked you if you could help defend the village against the monster tide, were you against the idea at first? At some point, Valyr asked this question to Tristan, finding a slower, yet more understandable rhythm to work with. Surprisingly, Tristan shook his head at the question, moving closer to Valyr to get a better view of his progress. I wasn't against the idea. In fact, when I heard about the monster tide, I thought it would be nice if I could help out. But wouldn't it be more beneficial for you to just keep crafting weapons instead of fighting against the monsters? Valyr asked in response, the dagger before him seemingly only needing a few dozen more hits to be complete. If I was another blacksmith, then I would have probably said yes, Tristan replied. However, in my opinion, if you only keep crafting weapons but not take the time to experience yourself using them, the weapons you end up making are subpar, considering that the essence of the weapons aren't in there. In my eyes, those who only craft weapons but not use them are the worst kind of blacksmiths. Of course, you could probably say that I don't practice what I preach, but I do, said Tristan afterwards as a bloodthirsty aura soon emanated from his body. Although you may know of my main class, which is an experienced blacksmith, I'm certain you don't know about my subclass yet. Well, unlike other people's subclasses, which would most likely be a useful production class, my subclass is a battle class, specifically a battle class that focuses on using all means to defeat the enemy before you, Tristan said as he reined in his aura. What's the name of the subclass, you might ask? Well, you could ask Damien, or use analysis on me. I don't really care. Anyways, finish that first. Hearing those words from Tristan, Valyr refocused his attention on the piece of metal before him, hammering it at a few more spots with a bit of finesse. A few seconds later, he looked at the progress he had made, a light smile adorning his face as he noticed that the dagger was a couple hits away from being complete. However, as he recalled that he didn't want Tristan to know he could successfully forge something on his first attempt, he inwardly apologized to the metal before slamming his hammer on it a few times at full strength, causing sizable dents to form on its surface. As he inwardly grimaced at the final product, Valyr lightly scratched his head as he placed the hammer he wielded by the side. Then, picking the dagger up, he gave it to Tristan, who had a slight frown on his face as he looked at what Valyr gave him. I think this is done. Looking at the deformed dagger that was given to him, Tristan could not help but have a light frown on his face as he tried to assess Valyr's first attempt at forging. Trying to find the right words to say, he went silent for a couple of minutes before eventually opening his mouth. Well, for your first attempt at forging something, I'd say this is pretty good. Hearing that, Valyr could not help but lightly smile in response, nodding. Though, while he listened to Tristan talk, he inwardly thought, if only successfully forging something on the first try wasn't suspicious. Sure, I could tell Tristan that me successfully forging the dagger on the first try was a fluke, but he'd definitely catch on that I have experience in the long run. To be honest, your form at the start was superb, Tristan continued. You had a stable rhythm going on. At the same time, you hammered down on the metal with great purpose and intent, something all blacksmiths should aim to achieve during forging. Then, he let out a light sigh. However, as time passed, it was as if I was watching another person hammering the metal entirely. You became sloppier, your rhythm became slower, your control over your strength became messier. In short, everything became worse. If you stuck with your form at the start till the very end, then I would have been holding a complete copper dagger at the moment, Tristan said, prompting Valyr to look down. Of course, there's still a few more processes after that to truly make it a dagger, but you know what I mean. At the start, I thought I was onto something, so I kept at it, Valyr said sometime later, quickly coming up with an excuse for his gradually worsening performance. Though, as time passed, I became more and more unsure if what I was doing was correct, so I tried correcting myself. Near the end, I didn't know if what I was doing was right anymore. As Valyr let out a sigh, Tristan looked at the dagger he was given once more before looking back at the man before him. After looking back and forth between the two for a while, he eventually gave Valyr a bit of advice. Here's the thing, Valyr. It's impossible for us blacksmiths to not second-guess whether what we're doing is wrong or right. However, what separates true blacksmiths from amateurs is the fact that true blacksmiths don't let their doubts waver them. They keep their doubts in mind, but they don't act upon them. Instead, they follow through with their actions till they reach the end. Tristan looked at Valyr directly in the eye. Then, with a solemn expression, he told him, "What I'm saying is have a bit more confidence in yourself, Valyr. Don't let your doubts affect what you're doing. Follow through your actions and see it to the end." As he listened to these words, Valyr could not help but nod in agreement, recalling the many other times he had heard these same words said to him in the past. Even though it seemed like such a piece of advice could come naturally to any person, this part was what eluded most amateur blacksmiths from becoming blacksmiths of their own right. In fact, it took Valyr a few months in his past life to fully understand this quote, committing mistakes in the hundreds before his mind finally got into the right mindset. Unsurprisingly, with his vigor renewed by such advice, Valyr was eager to try his hand at forging once more. However, noticing the enthusiasm writing all over Valyr's face, Tristan shook his head. Although I'd like to have you practice your forging skills, we can't really do that in the meantime. Why is that? Valyr asked, wondering what was stopping Tristan from having him continue practicing. Have you forgotten what's going to happen a few days from now? In response, Tristan looked at him with a hint of confusion. The monster tide? You're not going to sharpen your combat skills or anything. Rather than get a surprised expression from Valyr, what Tristan got instead was his indifference. But that's not really a reason to stop me from giving it a second shot. No? Valyr, there's no time limit to your quest, Tristan reminded him. You could focus on the quest after Monster Tide, or if you want, pick it up after a month, I don't care. For now, we gotta focus on the upcoming Monster Tide. After all, what's the point of your quest if there's no smithy to come back to after it? Hearing those words, it was a switch had been flipped on inside Valyr's mind. Letting out a sigh, he looked at Tristan, his gaze somewhat pleading the latter to give him a second shot. Unfortunately for him, Tristan was adamant, shaking his head in refusal. With that, Valyr stood up from his seat and turned around to leave the smithy, his gait despondent. Of course, as Tristan watched Valyr walk out of the smithy in low spirits, he could not help but feel a bit bad for the guy's enthusiasm. Eventually, with a light sigh and a scratch of his head, he told him, "How about this? I give you one attempt at forging every day until the Monster Tide. Then, once the Monster Tide passes and the smithy survives, you're free to try your hand at forging as much as you want." In that instant, the somewhat listless gaze on Valyr's face from before had disappeared, turning into one filled with determination and perseverance as he looked back at Tristan with renewed vigor. "Deal!" Whoosh! With that, he left the smithy to return to the barracks, leaving a somewhat speechless Tristan alone in the smithy. For some reason, he could not help but feel like he'd been played with by Valyr. Well, as long as it helps out defending the village against a monster tide, I don't mind. Shrugging his shoulders soon after, he then went to pick up the blade he had tempered before placing it on top of the anvil. Now that the hard part was over, it was time for him to turn the blade into an actual weapon. Once Valyr had returned to the barracks, he headed to the cafeteria to get some lunch. After he was done eating, he headed into the training field to hone his control over his spear, noticing that there were a lot more people than usual. Fortunately, it did not take long for him to realize that these were other people trying to get as much as improvement out of their combat skills as possible before the Monster Tide arrived. After a couple of hours in the training field, he then went to his dormitory and rested, only to get up for the night patrol later that night. All in all, that was Valyr's routine for the next 4 days. In the morning, he would head to the smithy and get an attempt at forging a dagger. Then after some time, he would return to the barracks and spend some time in the training field before heading out on a patrol later that night. On the night before the supposed Monster Tide, Valyr checked his status screen and noticed that he still had about 10,000 XP left over. Recalling the rewards he would obtain from the quest related to the Monster Tide, while at the same time thinking about how every ounce of power helped in making sure the smithy would be left unscathed, Valyr went ahead and upgraded the 2 combat skills he had. Ding! Would you like to spend 4433 XP to upgrade Pierce to level 5? Would you like to spend 4433 XP to upgrade Basic Spear Mastery to level 5? Yes. After accepting the 2 prompts that had appeared before him, Valyr went ahead and closed his eyes, quickly falling asleep in preparation for the onslaught that was about to come. Ding! The emergency quest Monster Tide has been activated. Head to the Astardo village's walls as soon as possible. MNNHH. While still in the middle of his sleep, Valyr could not help but open his eyes, his consciousness still half awake as he had been hearing the sounds of sirens for quite some time now. As his consciousness became more and more awake, he noticed how the sun's rays hadn't pierced through his window yet, which he took as a sign that meant he could still sleep in for a bit more. However, wing! Just as his eyes were about to close once more, the sound of a blaring siren resounded throughout the room once more, forcing his eyes to widen as his consciousness fully woke up because of it. With a frown, he sat up on his bed, wondering where the siren's sound had been coming from. Fortunately, the answer to his question was quickly obtained as multiple red screens filled with large text appeared before him, all saying the same thing. Ding! The emergency quest Monster Tide has been activated. Head to the Astardo village's walls as soon as possible. For a short while, Valyr looked at the words on the screens in silence, blinking in slight confusion. Though, not long after, realizing what the screens were trying to say, he closed all of the screens in front of him before quickly getting out of bed, hastily going through his morning routine before changing into a set of the village guard's uniform. Once he had confirmed that he had tied the wooden spear to his back tightly, he then went ahead and dashed towards the village gates as fast as his AGI could take him, foregoing the notion of breakfast for now. After leaving the barracks in post-haste, he noticed the sky was still a deep and dark red, which meant that there was still some time before sunrise. Recalling how he thought he could still sleep in a few minutes earlier because the sun hadn't fully risen yet, Valyr could not help but have the urge to slap himself, only to rein it in soon after. Fortunately, it did not take long for him to arrive at the village gates thanks to the streets still being devoid of people at this hour. Once he was near, he noticed that there were already a few people waiting by the gates, their expressions either anxious or nervous. "Glad to see you up, Valyr." By the time he arrived at the gates, Damien was the first one to greet him. In response, Valyr nodded, looking at the man before him as he had not seen him in this getup before. Although Damien wore the village guard's uniform underneath, only a small bit of it poked out of the set of armor he wore, which gave him the feeling that he could battle with tens or hundreds of monsters and still leave unscathed. "I presume you haven't eaten breakfast yet?" he asked soon after, to which Valyr also nodded in response. Pointing towards a certain direction, Damien told him, "Head in that direction, and you'll be able to get some light snacks that'll fill you up. Make it quick, though. There's no telling when a monster tide is a Reeve." Rumble. Just as Damien was telling Valyr where to fill up his stomach, the ground started to rumble, making Damien mutter out a curse under his breath as he let out a light sigh soon after. Noticing that Valyr looked at him with slight confusion, Damien told him, "Go and grab something to eat for now. Most of the people here at the moment have ranged classes, so I'll be instructing them to head up the village walls very soon. For us, Valyr, our battlefield is outside the village." Damien gave a rare smirk. "Now go. Meet me once you've satiated your hunger somewhat." With that, Valyr nodded before dashing in the direction Damien pointed in earlier. After a bit of running, he had arrived at a temporary camp, which was separated into two parts. One part of it was a section dedicated for cooking and serving meals to those that would participate in the defense against the monster tide. The other was an area solely made for those participating in the defense, allowing them to chow down on their food in silence. Surprisingly, once he was there, a lot of people had occupied the second part, with some deciding to eat their breakfast while standing up. Knowing that time was of the essence at this moment, Valyr swiftly made his way to the first section and got himself a light meal, getting a tray of food sometime later before making his way to the second area. Coincidentally, while he was in the middle of searching for a spot to eat his food in silence, he noticed a familiar person wearing a set of leather armor, silently eating their breakfast amidst the somewhat somber atmosphere emanating throughout the area. "Mind if I sit beside you?" Valyr asked the person, making the latter look at him for a bit in shock before eventually nodding. "So, got some good sleep, Tristan?" "I wish," Tristan said in response, shaking his head as he urged Valyr to eat his breakfast. "I've been up for hours last night, preparing everything I was going to bring for the monster tide. Speaking of which, wear this." Rummaging under the table they sat in front of, Tristan brought out a simple iron chest plate, giving it to Valyr. "It may not be much, but it'll help out in the long run." Receiving the chest plate, Valyr could not help but look at Tristan in shock, wondering why the latter would give him such a precious piece of equipment. Fortunately, It did not take long for him to understand why, eliciting a chuckle to come out of his mouth as he heard Tristan's next words. "Of course, once this is over, you better return that to me, okay?" I will. Nodding in response, Valyr went ahead and identified the chest plate before putting it on, continuing to devour his breakfast soon after. Ding! Light iron chest plate, level 10. Rarity, common. Defense, 12 to 19. A simple iron chest plate, made by an experienced blacksmith, allows the user to mitigate some damage received from attacks on the chest. Remarks: for some reason, it suits you. A couple minutes later, Valyr finished his breakfast, prompting him to stand up and make his way outside the village. However, for some reason, Tristan stood up from his seat as well. Because of that, he could not help but ask, "Where are you heading, Tristan?" "Outside the village, obviously," Tristan said as if it was a matter of fact. Noticing the slight confusion on Valor's face, he explained, "My subclass leans more heavily towards close combat." Although he wanted to ask more about Tristan's subclass, Valyr decided to place the matter at the back of his head for now, as the two hastily made their way outside the village, noticing that a long line of defenders had already been made. As the two of them looked at the line of defenders in silence, Damien came up to them with a solemn expression on his face. "Valyr, Tristan." With the two nodding in response to his words, Damien nodded back before continuing. "Valyr, head to the east section. You'll be accompanying one of the guard captains I stationed there as their deputy leader. As for you, Tristan, you'll be accompanying me at the center, where the brunt of the monster tide is," he added, looking at Tristan. With a nod, Tristan accompanied Damien to the front lines, while Valyr hastily made his way to the east section. Once in their positions, Damien could not help but look beyond the horizon, his eyes instantly noticing a large wave of monsters rapidly heading their way. "Men, it's time to show the village the reason why we've trained so hard. It's all for this behemoth in front of us." Taking in a deep breath, Damien yelled out all of a sudden, prompting all of those in his vicinity to listen. "We've already gone through so many monster tides. Are we going to let this one do us in?" "Sir, no, sir," everyone in the vicinity exclaimed. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Damien nodded in satisfaction. "The first wave is coming at us, men. You know what that means, right? It's time to let all hell loose. Show no mercy." While Damien was preparing all of those in the center section to fight against the monsters of the first wave, Valyr had just arrived at the east section. Unsurprisingly, all of the people that were already there looked at him with curious expressions, wondering what his purpose was for coming to their section. Gasping for a bit of air, Valyr looked around to see who the guard captain Damien mentioned earlier was, only to notice a familiar face among the people. With a light smile, he moved closer to the person. "I didn't expect to see you here, Leon. Were you assigned to this section as well?" In response, Leon flashed a light grin before embracing him. Valyr nodded. "Yeah, Damien told me to head here. According to him, I'll be the deputy leader of the team or something." Hearing the term deputy leader come out of Valor's mouth, some of the people could not help but talk to each other in a murmur, wondering how the young man before them was assigned deputy leader, even though appearance-wise, he did not seem to have the qualifications for such a position. As for Leon, when he heard the same term come out of his friend's mouth, his eyes could not help but widen in surprise. "Seriously? Damien actually told you that? What the hell have you been doing since the last time I saw you for Damien to give you that much responsibility?" Just as Valyr was about to answer his question, a woman had appeared in between the two of them, emanating a chilling aura throughout the immediate surroundings that made a couple people shudder before taking a few steps back. Surprisingly, even Leon had taken a few steps back as he looked at the woman with a hint of fear on his face. Noticing this, Valyr looked at the woman before him in silence. If one were to exclude the chilling aura she currently exuded, Valyr was certain that a lot of players would fall head over heels for her appearance once Greater Beyond was released to the public. Her long silver-gray hair was neatly tied into a ponytail, accentuating the overall shape of her face. In contrast, her irises were a vibrant light green, giving off a refreshing feeling if one looked into it. Nevertheless, This refreshing feeling was negated by the dark gray garb she wore, with a leather breastplate and arm guards being her only source of defense aside from her clothing. Overall, the feeling she gave Valyr was that she had chosen a class focused on high AGI. Curious to see whether his hypothesis was correct, he went ahead and used analysis on her, the result of which appeared in his mind. Ding! Missed Valyr, level 18. Class, Gale Blade, rank 1 uncommon. HP, 312 of 312. MP, 216 of 216. Stats, 26 VIT, 26 STAR, 61 AGI, 45 DX, 18 INT, 18 WIS, 18 PR, 18 LUK. Remarks: I get on her good sides if I were you. At the very moment he looked through her stats, Valyr could not help but inwardly suck in a lot of cold air at his mind, getting a first-hand look at how drastic the difference was between his stats and the stats of a bona fide rank 1 class holder. Her AGI was already more than double his current AGI, and she hadn't even reached the peak of rank 1 yet. While Valyr had renewed his impression of the woman before him, the woman went ahead and asked Valyr a question. Are you the one Damien sent to be the deputy leader of this section? That would be me. Valyr nodded in response. Would you perhaps be the guard captain Damien told me earlier? Correct. The woman nodded back, extending her hand soon after. Miss Valyr, rank 1 Gale Blade. Valyr Zeihardt. Seeing her extend her hand out, Valyr received it and gave a firm handshake. Rank 0 Civilian. Hearing Valyr's last few words, a small clamor arose in the surroundings, making them wonder once more how someone at the same level as them had gotten such an important position. In response to that, Mist looked at Valyr in the eye, to which Valyr surprisingly understood in an instant as he emanated the entirety of his aura. Whoosh! In an instant, an aura far stronger than what any of the others could exude appeared around Valyr, prompting all of them to go silent. Even Mist, who wasn't really expecting much from the show of force, could not help but slightly widen her eyes in surprise at the scene. A few seconds later, Valyr retracted his aura as silence enveloped the entirety of the east section. All right, taking advantage of the silence, Mist went ahead and spoke up. Glancing at the monsters that were coming ever closer to their section, she said, since all of the people defending this section are here, let me go over what I've mentioned before. For the first wave, all those level 8 and below shall proceed to the front lines. Those at level 9 and above shall stay behind the defensive line, only to move when someone in the front lines is in danger. As she said this, Mist commanded a few people to move forward. For the second wave and every subsequent wave after that, we'll formulate a plan once we find out who our opponents are. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am. Everyone exclaimed in unison, getting into their respective positions as they prepared for the wave of monsters that were about to head their way. As for Valyr, he looked at everything that was going on for a bit in silence, only for his attention to be caught by Mist, who was snapping her fingers at him. Come with me, Valyr, she said, prompting Valyr to nod in response as he hastily made his way to where she was. After that, the two of them walked for a bit, with Mist rearranging people as she deemed fit, while Valyr continued to watch on in silence. Eventually, after a couple minutes of Mist changing the arrangement of people in their section, Valyr could not help but ask, why did you ask those with the low levels to act as the front lines for the first wave? Wouldn't it make more sense to have us as the front lines? For what he could remember in his past life regarding Monster Tides, most of the time, high-level players were the ones that made up the bulk of the front lines. Then, the farther one went from the front, the lower the levels got, with those at the rear lines having the lowest levels among those participating in the Monster Tide. Of course, Valyr knew that the reason why high-level players were at the front was because they would be able to get more XP that way. However, he didn't know why the village didn't employ the same tactic, considering that it was incredibly effective. Fortunately, Mist had an answer to that. It's to give them the chance to gain enough XP to raise their levels. The more high-level people we have in the village, the better we can protect the village in the long run. Aside from that, we don't have enough high-level people to do that. Though, at some point our positions will be swapped, where they're behind the defensive lines while we're at the front lines. In any case, always keep an eye out if you see someone struggling against a monster, she said, renewing Valor's impression of Mist once more. It may seem like she's aloof and cold-hearted, but in fact, she's the exact opposite. Rumble. By the time the two of them had finished their conversation, a crescendoing rumble echoed throughout the surroundings, prompting everyone in the east section to look in front of them as a swarm of monsters were swiftly heading their way. With that, everyone gripped tightly onto their weapons as Mist's expression turned aloof once more. Front lines. Advance. Charge. As Mist gave out the command to advance, all of those at the front lines exclaimed in unison, soon letting out battle cries as they engaged against the monsters that were coming at them. At that moment, a cacophony of sounds erupted from the battlefield in front of the east section, the squeamish sound of metal cutting through flesh echoing throughout the surroundings amidst the beastly roars and cries of monsters being slain. While that was happening, all of those behind the defensive line watched the fight unfold from afar, their nerves taut from the uncertainty of whether their side would win or not. Nevertheless, although all of them remained vigilant and made sure to be aware of any trouble that might arise in the battlefield, most of them had somewhat relaxed, with some of them engaging in idle chatter as the number of monsters the east section was facing against gradually dwindled over time. In fact, at some point, Valyr wandered around the defensive line, keeping an eye at what was happening in the battlefield from time to time as he passively listened to the conversations that were happening all around him. Just as he had found a sense of peace amidst all the chaos happening on the battlefield, a familiar man had appeared before him, prompting a light smile to appear on Valor's face. "Aren't you a bit too glad to be staying behind the defensive line, Leon? Is there anything wrong with that?" Leon grinned, wrapping his arm over Valor's shoulder before walking alongside him. "I'm just making most of the situation before we have to head out to the battlefield. After all, we're the ones fighting the high-leveled monsters of the subsequent waves." As Leon said those words, Valyr went ahead and used analysis on his friend, the results of which slightly surprised him as he inwardly muttered, "To think he's actually one level from reaching the peak of rank 0. Ding. Leon Astrol, level 9. Class, Civilian, rank 0. HP, 120 of 120. MP, 90 of 90. Stats, 12 EIT, 12 STR, 12 AGI, 9 DX, 9 INT, 9 WIS, 9 PAR, 9 LUK. Remarks: you could fight against this guy no problem, but that would be bullying. Just like with Mist, Valyr made Leon's result appear within his mind, remembering to keep his field of vision free from any distraction in a situation like this one. Closing the screen soon after, a thought eventually surfaced in his mind, making him look at Leon. "Speaking of which, where are Jonas and Louis?" "The west section," Leon said in response, a bitter smile appearing on his face. "Yesterday, we told Damien that it'd be great if us three were positioned at the same section. However, due to some last-minute additions to the various sections, there was an imbalance of power, so Jonas and Louis had to be moved to the west section." Hearing Leon's explanation, it did not take long for Valyr to come to that conclusion. In response, Leon lightly nodded. After walking around the defensive line for a bit more as the two talked about a few more topics, the two eventually parted ways by the time only a few dozen monsters remained on the battlefield, prompting both of them to return to their respective positions. Once he had returned to his respective position, Valyr could not help but look at Mist a slight distance away from him, who was looking at the battlefield with a solemn expression, deciding to do the same thing as her. He looked at the battlefield soon after, deciding to use analysis on some of the monsters those at the front lines were fighting against. Level 5 and level 6 monsters. Valyr muttered to himself, lightly shrugging his shoulders sometime later. They're losing out on a bunch of XP from not fighting monsters at the same level as them, considering that most of them are around level 7 or so. Nevertheless, they'll still gain a lot of XP from this. After all, quantity can make up for quality, he continued. After looking at the battlefield for a couple of minutes, inwardly calm as the monsters now numbered in the tens, he turned his head to look at Mist and asked her a question, pointing at the people on the battlefield. Will they be at the front lines on the second wave as well? Most of them. Mist nodded in response. If our predictions are correct, then the monsters in the second wave will be made up of ideal targets for most of the people on the battlefield at the moment. Of course, we'll be telling all those below a certain level to stay behind the defensive line and get some rest once the wave is over, she continued, nodding in satisfaction soon after she yelled out, "Front lines, head back to the defensive line and get some rest." Hearing that, most of the people on the battlefield cheered in excitement, while some of the people let out loud sighs of relief. Nevertheless, all of them hastily made their way back behind the defensive line, as if the exhaustion brought about by fighting against multiple monsters wasn't there in the first place. However, just as all of those in the east section thought that they could rest easy, a voice from beyond the east section exclaimed something that made some of the people stop in their tracks. "Rogue monster! Rogue monster heading to the east section." In an instant, all of those that hadn't made it behind the defensive line yet ran as fast as their tired legs could take them, while some of the high-level people made their way to the front of the defensive line, ready to engage with the rogue monster that had been announced. As for Valyr, once he heard this announcement from afar, his pupils could not help but shrink for a bit as he utilized his perception to its fullest, eventually finding a monster from afar, making a mad dash towards the defensive line of the east section. Although the faint aura he could sense from the monster from afar was enough for him to realize that none of the people at the front lines could hope to fight against it, he went ahead and made sure of the monster's level through analysis. Unfortunately, the results from analysis only exacerbated his worries even more, eventually shouting, "Everyone, fall back. It's a level 11 monster." Hearing that a monster way beyond what they could handle was heading their way, almost everyone around the front of the defensive line retreated as far as possible, prioritizing their own safety instead of the others. Naturally, the sight could not help but make Valyr frown, retrieving the spear behind his back as he thought he would have to make a move. But before he could even do so, a dark gray streak zoomed past the defensive line, with only Valyr being the only one there having the perception necessary to follow. Swish! In just a few seconds, the dark gray streak had stopped before the rogue monster, only for the monster's head to fall off its neck soon after as its headless body fell to the ground with a thud. A deafening silence covered the entire battlefield after that, which was soon replaced with cheers and yells of excitement and admiration from those behind the east section's defensive line, as well as those from the right portion of the center section's defensive line. "Well, I guess that explains the name of the class a lot," Valyr said to himself, chuckling soon after as he recalled the speed at which the dark gray streak had arrived before the monster, far faster than what he could yearn to achieve at the moment. As for the one who killed the monster, Mist looked at the monster before her with silence before letting out a light sigh. Shaking her head, she shook off the blood that dripped off the blade she used to kill the monster before heading back to the east section's defensive line. While Mist had landed a clean hit on the rogue monster that made its way to the east section, a man from the center section watched the scene unfold from afar, his mouth becoming slack-jawed as he had never seen a person from the village so effortlessly and cleanly decapitate a monster's head in one swift move. "Who the hell did that?" Tristan could not help but exclaim, his expression that of awe as he looked at the armored man beside him. Nudging the man, he asked, "Is that person a newcomer to the village?" "A newcomer? Not at all." In response to the question, Damien shook his head. Then, with a light smirk, he told Tristan, "In fact, you're very familiar with that person already." "Well, come on, spit out. Don't leave me in suspense." Tristan frowned soon after, noticing that Damien was intentionally not mentioning the name of the person that did the feat he had just seen. Turning his head to what was in front of them, he repeated, "Come on, Damien, just tell me already. The second wave is coming." Fine. Hearing how badly Tristan wanted to know who it was, Damien could not stop himself from laughing for a bit. Eventually, after taking a few deep breaths, he told him, "It's Mist, Tristan. Mist did that." "Mist?" Tristan tilted his head, trying to rummage through his memory as the name was familiar to him. After some time, his eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, you're telling that little girl from a few years ago had actually done what she promised to do?" As he said this, Tristan could not help but remember the first time he had met with the girl. It was on a fateful day when two people had arrived at the smithy, Damien, who had just become the leader of the village guards at that time, and the girl he eventually knew as Mist. According to what he could recall, Damien asked him if he could forge a specific weapon for Mist, a thin, aerodynamic blade that resembled a sword more than a rapier. In response to that, Tristan could not help but ask why, telling them that any sword would do just fine. Surprisingly, the one to answer that question was the young Mist, who looked at him with eyes filled with determination before opening her mouth, saying words that had stuck to his memory since then. That's because I want to become the fastest sword user there is. She's definitely the fastest sword user I know. Tristan chuckled at the memory, a hint of pride on his face, feeling that he had made an impact on how Mist had grown into what she was today. Letting out a light sigh soon after, he looked at Damien before lightly nodding. Mind if I craft a blade for her once this monster tide is over? Be my guest. Damien lightly shrugged his shoulders. I'm sure Mist would be glad to receive a new blade from you. Receiving a smile from Tristan in response, Damien then focused his attention to what was before them. Narrowing his eyes a bit as a light frown appeared on his face, he then ordered a couple people to come closer to him. Tell the west and east section to move a bit closer to the center. It's almost time for the second wave to arrive. By the time Mist had returned to the east section, almost everyone there was cheering for her, with some of them talking about how effortlessly she killed the monster that had gone rogue. In response to those words, Mist lightly smiled and nodded at them, thanking them before returning to her original position. It seems like there's something on your mind. Valyr could not help but say to Mist once she had returned, prompting the latter to look at him with a raised eyebrow. Seeing that he had caught her attention, he scratched his cheeks and continued. Judging by your expression, it feels like you're dissatisfied. I guess so. Mist shrugged her shoulders in response, obtaining a message from the center section for the east section to move closer sometime later. As she commanded everyone to move a bit closer to the center section, she continued to talk with Valyr. Let's just say I don't feel like I'm moving fast enough. You're already moving plenty fast to me, Valyr told her. In fact, out of everyone in the east section, I think I was the only one who could see where you were headed, though I'm pretty sure I lost track of you at times. That's the thing, Mist replied, lightly sighing. I want to move so fast that no person could track me. Well, that's definitely a lofty goal, Valyr could not help but say. Have you gotten skills that increase your AGI? More or less, I guess, Mist said in response before taking a quick glance at the battlefield in front of them. Calculating that there were only a few minutes until the second wave arrived, she ordered everyone to hasten their pace. I bought every passive skill in the contribution point shop that boosts my AGI. I also bought every active skill that does the same thing, but I can only activate so much of them until my mana runs out. After pondering over it for a bit, Valyr went ahead and used analysis on the equipment Mist was wearing. By the time the east section had finished their relocation to be nearer to the center section, Valyr finally noticed the one part she hadn't been using to its full advantage. Her equipment doesn't boost her stats at all. Although rare at the early stages of the game, equipment that boosted stats gradually became more and more common once one went through the various class ranks. In fact, it could be said that a huge part of the reason why high-level players were able to achieve incredibly high stats was mostly due to the equipment they wore, boosting all of their stats to insane degrees. The only thing she has that boosts her AGI is the sword around her waist, Valyr thought. On top of that, the boost from it isn't the maximum you could get from a weapon made for a rank 1 class holder. When was the last time you changed your equipment? Valyr asked while Mist was in the middle of choosing people to fight at the front lines. A couple of days ago. Why do you ask? Mist said in response, asking Valyr if he could help out in the arranging of personnel to tackle the second wave. Well, I feel like I have an idea on how you could get one step closer to achieving your goal, Valyr said in response, which instantly piqued Mist's interest. However, just as she was about to ask how, rumble. A rumble far stronger than the first wave was felt throughout the entire defensive line, making a couple people at the front lines stumble and fall from the sheer intensity of the rumble. Unfortunately for Mist, seeing as the second wave of monsters was already in front of them, Mist could not help but inwardly sigh, placing the matter at the back of her head for later as she refocused her attention towards the battlefield. Advance! Grah! Just like in the first wave, those that were assigned to the front lines had gone past the defensive line once more, charging forward to meet their opponents in the battlefield. However, as Mist watched the people she had assigned to fight on the second wave move past the battlefield, she had stopped a couple of them before they could move any further. Halt! Naturally, hearing that command come out of their section leader's mouth, there was nothing those people could do but to stop in their tracks, wondering why they were stopped by their leader before they could move any further. Thankfully, the answer to that question arrived before them soon after, with Mist informing them what could have happened if they had continued, causing their bodies to shudder. It was my oversight to have you guys be assigned to the second wave. The monsters in this wave are level 7 at the very least. I won't stop you if you choose to step beyond the defensive line and punch above your weight. She looked at them with a stern expression. However, you're also free to head back behind the village walls as you've already done your respective tasks. The choice is yours. After pondering over Mist's words for a bit, the people she called to stay looked at each other for a bit, only to look at the battlefield before them soon after. Eventually, after a few more seconds, they went ahead and thanked Mist before making their way back to the village. Seeing as the people she stopped were making their way to the village, she shifted her attention towards those who had stayed behind the defensive line during the first wave. After scanning through all of the people she could choose, she eventually picked out those who seemed fit for the type of monsters those at the front lines were currently up against, pointing at them. You, and you. You're all a level or 2 above the monsters during this wave, so you better help the others if the chance arises. Yes, ma'am. Surprisingly, all of them didn't complain that they were chosen. Instead, the people she chose took in a deep breath before gripping tightly onto respective weapons, dashing towards the battlefield a couple of seconds later. Seeing that the people she chose had no problems filling in for those that left, watching them get into the rhythm of killing monsters while helping out the others when they could, Mist let out a light sigh of relief, heading back to her original position once she noticed that the fight would be more or less smooth sailing, just like the first wave. So, Valyr, since our conversation earlier was interrupted by the second wave, would you mind telling me that idea you had? Mist looked at Valyr beside her, her expression brimming with curiosity, as well as expectation. The idea that would get you one step closer to achieving your goal, right? Valyr asked to make sure. With Mist nodding in response to his question, Valyr nodded back and opened his mouth, only to be interrupted by a voice that gradually got louder and louder as it came closer to them. Oh, who knew these two would actually be acquainted with one another? Hearing the familiar voice enter his hearing, Valyr turned his head around to look at the man that had appeared before them. Tristan, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the center section with Damien? I was, but Damien told me to wander around since I looked so bored while watching those at the front lines shred through the monsters like nothing. Tristan let out a chuckle. In any case, since the center section had no problems dealing with the second wave, I've decided to pay a visit to the east section to meet up with you, Valyr. Though, I'd never expect to see another familiar face in the same section. Saying that, he turned his head to look at Mist with a smile. It's been a while since we've last met, Mist. It seems you're getting closer and closer to achieving your dream. I'm still far away. If anything, I've only made a bit of headway into it. Mist shook his head. Though, Valyr was about to tell me an idea that would allow me to get closer to achieving that goal. Is that so? Hearing Mist's words, Tristan could not help but raise his eyebrow before turning to look at Valyr. Mind if I listen? Would have still told her about it, even if you didn't ask. Valyr shrugged his shoulders. Then again, I'm sure you already know what I have in mind to make her faster, Tristan. I do. Tristan scratched his head, slightly confused. This is the first time you two have met, right? In response to the question, Valyr and Mist nodded in unison. If that's the case, then why do you think I know what you're thinking, Valyr? Tristan looked back at Valyr. Think about it for a bit, Tristan, Valyr said in response. Mist has a class that leans towards AGI, has skills that boost her AGI, Yet there's still one thing she's missing. I'm sure you can figure out from there, right? Listening to Valyr's words, Tristan could not help but go silent, his eyes gaining a light blue tint as he stared at Mist for a bit. As the light blue haze around his eyes gradually disappeared, he could not help but look at Valyr, his expression that of understanding as he lightly smirked. That's what you meant, huh? It's the only thing she could do aside from leveling up and upgrade her skills. Valyr nodded, a light smile appearing on his face. Mind telling me what's going on? Of course. Mist still had no clue what the two of them were thinking. What idea does Valyr have to help me become faster, Tristan? Well, let me answer that for you. Just as Tristan was about to open his mouth, Valyr interrupted him and started to speak. Do you have a skill that allows you to identify things? I have monster analysis. What about it? Mist replied, prompting the two to look at each other as everything finally made sense to them. That actually explains a lot of things, Valyr said soon after. To cut things short, you're not making full use of your equipment. Mist tilted her head in slight confusion. But I've upgraded my equipment just a couple of days ago. You may have upgraded your equipment, but only your weapon increases your stats. Tristan was the one to respond this time around. If you had analysis, you would have been able to see information on your current equipment. If you did, you would have noticed that your sword increases your AGI stat by a couple points. Grayo. Though, just as Tristan was about to continue explaining to Mist what she could do to improve her stats, a loud roar resounded throughout the surroundings, prompting everyone to look at the battlefield, noticing that another wave of monsters from afar were heading their way, their auras far stronger than any of the monsters on the battlefield. What the hell? Tristan cursed. I thought the third wave wouldn't be coming anytime soon. With that, Tristan hastily bade farewell to the two as he swiftly made his way back to the center section. We'll have to cut our conversation short here. Just a heads up, I'm sure Damien is going to relay a couple orders to all sections sometime soon. Surprisingly, just as Tristan had darted off into the distance, a yell reverberated throughout the defensive line, echoing so far as to reach even the end of the west and east sections. All sections, heed my orders. All guard captains and deputy leaders are to head into the front lines as soon as possible. It's time to make a move. Surprisingly, once Damien's voice was finished reverberating throughout the surroundings, an odd lull enveloped the defensive line. At that moment, everyone looked at each other, wondering if they had heard the announcement correctly. Of course, expecting something like this to happen from the suddenness of the command, Damien shook his head with a sigh before yelling out once more, finally jolting everyone back to reality as those called made their way to the front lines. Guard captains, deputy leaders, your hesitation will undoubtedly jeopardize the lives of those in the battlefield. If you don't want to become the cause of deaths that could have been easily avoided, then move your fucking asses. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At the very instant he was finished talking, a few people from each section had moved past the defensive line, all of them having solemn expressions as they tightly gripped on their weapons. Without much difficulty, these people zoomed past the battlefield to the front, avoiding all of the people and the low-level monsters these people were fighting against. Bang! Before the subsequent wave could even reach halfway to the front of the battlefield, those people had appeared before them, unleashing their strongest moves as they brought down a dozen monsters in one fell swoop. Of course, as he was delegated as deputy leader, Valyr was also one of those who had arrived to meet the third wave, killing intent emanating from his body as he dodged a monster's attack before lodging his spear into the head of another. Pierce! Bang! Minus 144. With the great amount of strength behind Valyr's attack, his wooden spear pierced through the monster's head without a problem, appearing on the other side for a bit before Valyr retracted it back. Then, leaving the monster no time to think, he ducked downwards and thrust his spear towards its neck, taking a step forward to regain his balance. FSH. Minus 69. Ding. As a notification sound resounded in his mind, he looked at the monster for a bit, watching it gradually lose its vigor as it fell to its side with a thud. Taking in a deep breath, he then stepped on top of the fresh corpse, using it as a platform to head to another side of the battlefield, deciding to handle 3 monsters in a row with a mix of basic movements, as well as Pierce. Analysis. While fighting against these monsters, Valyr went ahead and examined the stats of one of them, wondering why it seemed somewhat easy for him and the others to kill these monsters that made up the third wave. As the result of the skill had appeared in his mind, he quickly understood as to why, finishing off the monsters in front of him before exerting all his strength into one giant leap. Soon after, he maneuvered his body in the air, pointing his spear downwards to strike at the monster that was planning to ambush him. Pierce. Bang. Minus 144. Aside from the monsters being level 10 and level 11, there's one other thing that makes it easier for me to kill them, he muttered, punching the monster with all its strength as he landed on his feet. In response, the monster was sent flying for a few meters, colliding with a few monsters along the way as collateral. Ding. Monster, level 10. HP, 90 out of 90. Remarks. You're definitely a bully if you're fighting against something like this. Pick on someone your own size. For some reason, they have less health than normal monsters. Gasping for air, he looked around the battlefield, noticing that all of those that were called to action had made a dent to the number of monsters making up the third wave. To his right, Mist was zooming through the battlefield, landing multiple hits on monsters she passed through, effectively killing them before they even realized what was happening. To his left, a bulky man wielding a greatsword charged into the center of a bunch of monsters, only to rotate his body at high speed soon after. Surprisingly, the weight and the momentum behind the greatsword was enough to cleave through the monsters and kill them, making Valyr's eyes slightly widen in incredulity as he could not help but recall a certain memory while watching the scene unfold from afar. Isn't this a skill of that hero from that one game? However, unlike the memory he recalled, this person's momentum gradually increased as he continued to move around the battlefield, turning into a rotating blade solely made for killing monsters. At some point, Valyr could not help but wonder if the man would ever get nauseous from what he was doing, seeing that the man had kept it up for over a minute already. Nevertheless, as there were still a ton of monsters before him, he knew he could not afford to watch what the others were doing for any longer, charging in once more to fight against the monsters. As he was not a true rank 1 class holder yet, he utilized his knowledge of vital and brutal hits to make up for his lacking stats, always making sure to aim for the monster's weak spots. Because of that, the speed at which he killed his portion of monsters, which would normally be the worst among them, was on par with the others that were also fighting. I totally forgot I could unlock those. After killing a couple dozen more monsters on his side, Valyr could not help but stop in his tracks as a certain memory surfaced in his mind, telling him that there was something he still hadn't used that could improve his killing efficiency. System, open up the technology tree. Ding. As the screen containing the technology tree had appeared in his peripheral vision, Valyr continued to move around, relying on his muscle memory he had honed in his past life to fight against the monsters while he perused through the technology tree. I still have 30 technology points left over after unlocking the advancements I needed from the innovation and production section, he muttered, spending a certain amount of them without hesitation as a string of notifications appeared in his mind soon after. The upgrade to that skill may not seem like much, but as long as I play my cards right, I'll be able to rack up more kills. Skimming through the notifications he had received, Valyr closed all of them as a grin appeared on his face, fearlessly looking at the monster in front of him before jumping forward and thrusting his spear out, aiming for the monster's head. Then again, this other upgrade is already overkill. Strong Pierce. Bang. Minus 201. With how destructive the force behind the attack was, the monster's head was blown clean off as a dark red number appeared above the monster's body for a few seconds before disappearing. For a moment, all of the monsters in the surroundings became silent at the sight that had just unfolded in front of them, their gazes containing a hint of fear towards the man that stood before them. However, not long after, this fear disappeared, instead being replaced with unadulterated rage. Distancing himself from the monsters that seemed hell-bent on killing him, Valyr could not help but recall the number that had appeared above the monster's head earlier, making him let out a loud cackle before halting in his steps, turning around to look at the monsters chasing after him with a slightly devilish grin. Taking in a deep breath, he bent his knees before exerting all of his strength through them, darting speedily towards the monsters. Letting out a light chuckle, he leaped into the air once more before striking down on one of the monsters with his spear. Strong pierce! While Valyr and the others were making easy work of the monsters that made up the third wave, Damien and Tristan looked at the sight from afar, both of them nodding in satisfaction, as it seemed that the second wave of monsters would be gone by the time those fighting against the third wave were around halfway to killing all of the monsters. Your men still surprise me with their power as always, Damien. A light smile appeared on Tristan's face, his expression that of slight relief. If you have more people like that in your ranks, then there will come a time where we don't have to worry about monster tides anymore. If only it was that easy to get them to reach that level. Damien bitterly smiled. Nevertheless, a slightly prideful expression still remained on his face. Most of the people that join the village guards are only there to increase their reputation and meet the status quo. To have more people like those fighting the third wave in our ranks, they would have to be willing to go out of their comfort zone, which they're not. Except for one person, that is. Looking at Tristan, it seemed that the two of them had thought of the same person in mind. With that, the two redirected their vision towards the portion of the third wave where they remembered that person was fighting. However, instead of seeing a person struggle somewhat against a large number of monsters, what they saw instead was a person moving through the monsters like it was nothing, his hits all dealing great amounts of damage, especially once that person had aimed for a monster's head. Bang! Although the explosion sound they heard was faint due to their distance from it, both Damien and Tristan were both slack-jawed as they looked at Valyr fighting against the monsters with incredulity written all over their faces. What they had just seen was the head of the monster exploding into bits as Valyr landed on the ground, moving on to another monster before repeating the same thing all over again. With that in mind, the two of them could not help but look at the ground on Valor's side, their eyes widening as they were left aghast, not expecting Valor's side to get that bloody. Adding on the chunks of flesh and brain matter that were scattered throughout that portion of the battlefield, it wouldn't be surprising for a person to outright vomit at the sight of it. As for Tristan and Damien, what was going in their heads was not that. Instead, what they wanted to know was when Valyr had achieved that kind of combat power. Are you sure he hasn't ascended to a rank 1 class yet? Tristan could not help but look at Damien with a hint of doubt. After all, among the two of them, Damien had been the first one to interact with Valyr. I wish I wasn't joking. Damien shook his head, his expression solemn. Nevertheless, his eyes still contained the shock he felt when he watched Valyr kill those monsters without much difficulty. I used analysis on him when we met up earlier. Want to know what I got? What did you get? Tristan asked, his curiosity piqued. Just like what he's been telling us all this time, he's still level 10, Damien said in response, making Tristan scratch his head. However, his stats are a different story. Almost all of them are over 20 points. If not for the fact he's still level 10, I would have thought he'd chosen to take an all-rounder class for a rank 1 class. Seriously? Tristan raised his eyebrow before taking a glance once more at Valyr from afar. At this moment, the number of monsters on Valor's portion of the battlefield was around a couple hundred or so, which was slightly more than those on the other portions. However, unlike the other portions, some of the monsters on Valor's side started to not even move at this point, just from how brutal Valyr killed the other monsters. Where the hell did he get his extra stats then? He asked. In response, Damien could only shrug his shoulders. I don't know. I only started to notice his presence becoming stronger than the others just recently. If I were to hazard a guess, he might have come across a treasure of some sort that increases his stats. Wonder if Valyr is willing to tell us how he increased his stats. Letting out a light sigh, Tristan looked at Damien with a smile, his eyes conveying a message to the latter. I'm pretty sure he won't. Damien shrugged his shoulders once more. But if it's for the sake of the village, it's worth a shot. While the two were wondering how Valyr had stats comparable to a rank 1 class holder, Mist looked at the scene unfolding to her left with great bewilderment. As her rank 1 class was one that specialized in AGI, the speed at which she killed her share of monsters was significantly faster than the others, allowing her to get a bit of time to rest before going on an onslaught once more. While taking a respite, she decided to take a look at how the others were faring, only for her eyes to widen greatly as she noticed how bloody Valyr's side of the battlefield had become. Where did all of the blood come from? Left aghast, Mist continued to watch Valyr weave through the monsters and fight against them, ignoring the conditions of the others. With that decision, she soon found out the answer to her previous question, which was in the form of one gruesome bang. Before her eyes, the head of a monster exploded into chunks as its headless body soon fell to the ground with a thud. At this point, her mouth went agape as a thought gradually surfaced into her mind. Is this the reason why Damien chose him for the position of deputy leader? Did he allocate all of his points towards strength or something? She could not help but think. After pondering over it for a bit, she thought it made sense. After all, since she excelled in speed, then there was a need in their section for someone to balance that out, which was Valyr with his superhuman strength. Of course, such a thought was nowhere near the truth. Unlocking those advancements have definitely helped increase my killing efficiency, but I still feel like the upgrade to that skill is overkill, Valyr muttered as he rested on a boulder after moving away from the monsters for a bit. Then again, I would have unlocked them sooner or later. As he opened his notification screen, he looked at the sight before him, the ground taking on a deep red color due to how it was saturated with the blood of the monsters he had killed. Scratching his head as he wondered if the village would be mad at him for destroying a piece of land by saturating it with blood, he soon focused his attention on the notifications he had received. Ding! You have unlocked the advancements Basic Knowledge, Spear LV. 1. Basic Techniques, Spear LV. 1. Basic Understanding, Spear LV. 1. Basic Essence, Spear LV. 1. As you have unlocked the advancements Basic Knowledge, Spear, the passive skill Basic Spear Mastery has been upgraded with your renewed understanding of the spear. As you have unlocked the advancements Basic Knowledge, Spear, the active skill Pierce has been upgraded with your renewed understanding of the spear, transforming into the active skill Strong Pierce. I had a feeling I'd unlock you sooner or later. Surprisingly, Valyr had glossed over the notifications regarding the upgrades to his combat skills. Instead, his attention was on the string of notifications that had just recently appeared, a light chuckle escaping from his mouth not long after. Ding! The traces of a soul are awakening within your weapon due to how many monsters you've killed with it so far. The weapon yearns for more bloodshed, wanting to utilize the essence from the blood to have these soul traces congregate and form a true soul. However, it knows that it cannot achieve this alone, so it asks for your help. A nascent weapon bond has been made between you and Wooden Spear. Current bond level is 1. As he read through the notifications, Valyr could not help but let out a light chuckle. I guess I have no choice but to stick with this spear for real. As long as I get to the 3rd bond level, the fact that it's a basic wooden spear wouldn't even matter more. Although part of the reason why Valyr had not changed to a better spear yet, even though he had the means to do so, was because he felt that it would take precious time to acclimate to a new spear. The main reason why he did not do so was due to the connection he had felt brewing between him and the spear. Of course, with the system making the connection official, Valyr was even more adamant in continuing to use the spear, even though he was way above the required level to wield it. For most people, weapon bonds were nothing more than a special feature of the game that gave players a reason to keep using their weapon even after they had outgrown them. Analysis. Ding. Wooden Spear, Level 1. Rarity, Common. Weapon Bond, LV1 Valyr. Attack, 5 to 8, plus 10%. A spear given to those newly enlisted with the village guards of Astardo village, being deemed by most people as a training weapon until one could afford a proper weapon. Nevertheless, the material it is made of and the level of attention to it allows it to keep up in battle somewhat. As the user has continued to use the spear, even though they have already outgrown it, traces of a soul have awakened inside the spear, allowing it to somewhat grow to meet the needs of the user. Remarks. I don't know if you're hardworking or just incredibly stupid. However, As Valyr looked at the newly updated description of his wooden spear, he was gradually reminded of the true reason why weapon bonds were sought after in the later versions. Aside from increasing the weapon's main stat by a certain percentage, which was what most people knew, the higher levels of weapon bonds changed the nature of the weapons themselves, allowing players who owned weapons with high-level weapon bonds to do far more than what a player without one couldn't. The requirement to reach those higher levels are time-consuming, to say the least. Recalling what he needed to do to reach the higher levels, a wry smile could not help but appear on Valor's face as he stood up to face the monsters once more, dashing into their territory to fight them. Though, with how brutal Valyr was in killing the other monsters, those that had arrived to fight him seemed to have less of an edge than before, making it seem like they were only moving to meet with Valyr just because they were forced to. Of course, Valyr was oblivious to what was going on in the minds of the monsters he fought, brandishing his spear for the sole purpose of increasing the number on his quest. Strong Pierce. Bang. Minus 199. Once more, with the power behind his strike, a monster's head was obliterated once more, prompting slightly angered roars to come out of the mouths of the monsters surrounding Valyr. In response, Valyr looked at the monsters with a light grin, charging towards one of them before executing the same move as earlier. Bang! Minus 119. While killing the monsters, he could not help but notice that the connection between him and the spear he wielded gradually deepened with each kill. On top of that, he felt that the wooden spear gained a bit of heft to it as well, giving him the feeling that the spear was gradually growing more resilient the more he killed. Aside from that, he also focused his attention on Strong Pierce and the high amount of damage it dealt, even when he only aimed for a vital hit. I don't even have to hit them on the head anymore to kill them. I can just strike at their necks with Strong Pierce, and they'd still die. Although unlocking the technology tree's advancements gave a person skills most of the time, such as the case with Valyr unlocking 4 skills at once after progressing through the production section, the main reason why NPCs and players progressed through the combat section was for a different reason. Sure, unlocking certain advancements from the combat section also yielded a couple of skills here and there, but the main reason why people progressed through the combat section was the fact that the unlocked advancements tended to upgrade skills already owned by players and NPCs alike. At times, the knowledge from the advancements would even evolve skills. A great example of this was Valyr's active skill, Pierce, which had transformed into Strong Pierce after he had unlocked a couple advancements related to the spear in the combat section. Ding! Strong Pierce, level 5 out of 10. Rarity, common. A skill capable of dealing great damage with a quick thrust. Best paired with a spear or a rapier. Deals 175% damage based on the user's attack stat. Cost, 9 MP. Cooldown, for seconds. Reading through the skill description as he continued to fight against the monsters, Valyr could not help but whistle in awe at the change. So, you're telling me I'm basically dealing 50% more damage with the skill than I used to. Well, that works for me. Laughing, he closed the screen before continuing to fight against the monsters on his side of the battlefield. Guard captains, deputy leaders, fall back. Seeing that the second wave of monsters had finally been taken care of, Damien made the announcement, putting a bit more strength into his voice to make sure it would be heard from afar. Fortunately, his voice was indeed heard from where they were, prompting those that were previously fighting against the third wave to retreat and return to the defensive line, Valyr being one of them. Once Valyr had returned to the defensive line, he could not help but let out a light sigh of relief as he noticed Mist appear near him sometime later. Those who have been assigned to the front lines for the third wave get in formation. Taking in a deep breath, Mist soon opened her mouth. As the monsters for this wave are all a couple of levels above you. Attack the monsters in pairs. Do you hear me? Yes, ma'am. In response, a thunderous shout resounded from the front lines of the east section. Advance! After saying those words, Mist nodded in satisfaction before turning around, letting out a long sigh of relief soon after. So, Valyr, mind telling me what happened out there? Though, rather than head to the rear lines and take a rest, she instead looked at Valyr, the scene from earlier still fresh in her mind. You still haven't ascended to rank 1, right? Valyr nodded in response. Yeah. How were you able to deal that much damage, even though you haven't ascended yet? Mist's expression was currently that of immense curiosity, wondering how someone like Valyr was able to achieve a level of combat power on par with rank 1 class holders. Mind if I join in on the conversation? Just as Valyr was about to respond to the question, a familiar face had appeared within their surroundings, prompting the two to look at the man that had arrived. Tristan? What are you doing here again? At this point, Valyr could not help but be a bit suspicious. In response, a light chuckle escaped Tristan's mouth as he looked at Valyr. Well, but definitely the reason why I've come back here. After all, what you've done out there is definitely something a normal rank 0 class holder can't do. Anyways, mind enlightening us both how you did what you did out there? With that question asked, Tristan and Mist looked at Valyr, their expressions that of curiosity. It wouldn't hurt to tell us, right? Tristan lightly smiled. Surprisingly, rather than beat around the bush and remain tight-lipped regarding the method as to how he was able to dish out that much damage, Valyr instead shrugged his shoulders, opening his mouth to explain he had done so. Naturally, both Tristan and Mist went wide-eyed at this decision, not expecting the man before them to give out his secret that easily. Well, it's not really too difficult to figure out how I did that if you knew what I was doing. I'm sure both of you have heard of Pierce, right? Valyr looked at them, waiting for them to respond. Obtaining light nods from the two, Valyr nodded back. Well, what if I told you that was the skill I was using to kill those monsters? Hearing that, Tristan and Mist looked at each other for a bit, knowing very well that such a skill wouldn't deal that much damage in the hands of a rank 0 class holder. Just as they were about to tell Valyr this, a light grin appeared on his face as he knew what they were thinking. Noticing the light grin on his face, the two decided to remain silent, allowing Valyr to continue speaking. Of course, it's obvious that you two wouldn't believe me. Valyr lightly chuckled. After all, such a skill shouldn't be able to deal that much damage. But what if I told you there was a way to make it do just that? Let me tell you beforehand that I have no buffs whatsoever. If I did, I would have told you that already. Placing his hands behind his back, Valyr waited for the two to figure it out for themselves. Fortunately, he did not have to wait that long as everything clicked inside Tristan's mind, prompting him to look at Valyr with a hint of surprise. Did you spend points on that section? Flashing a smile at Tristan in response, Valyr nodded. Exactly. I spent a couple technology points on the combat section of the technology tree. Surprisingly, Mist tilted his head in slight befuddlement as she heard the term technology tree come out of Valyr's mouth. Shouldn't the technology tree only be accessible to those with rank 1 classes and above? Normally, that would be the case. Valyr nodded in agreement. However, you can have someone unlock your technology tree while still being at rank 0. Though, that's only as long as you're willing to give a rank 1 class holder free reign over your mind for a bit. What do you mean free reign over your mind? Tristan scoffed. I just sent a bit of my mana into your body. You exaggerate too much. Naturally, Valyr could not help but chuckle. Anyways, unlocking a couple advancements in the combat section upgraded Pierce to Strong Pierce, which is more or less the reason I could dish out that much damage. Now does that answer both of your questions? With his explanation, Valyr looked at the two, wondering if they were satisfied with his answer. In response to the question, Tristan nodded at him. However, from how Mist was still looking at him with a hint of confusion, it seemed that she still had something more to ask. Why did you unlock your technology tree early, though? Surely that's not the only reason why you do such a thing, right? Progressing into the combat section was more or less an afterthought, Valyr said in response. As for the main reason why, you're better off asking Tristan about it. With that, Mist looked at Tristan beside her, who shrugged his shoulders as he looked back. He wants to become a blacksmith. Speaking of blacksmith, while Mist looked at Valyr with a face filled with surprise, Valyr asked Tristan, mind if I could borrow a forging hammer and knife? I could have someone bring it to you in a couple minutes, but what do you need those for? Tristan raised his eyebrow, curious as to what Valyr was going to do with the items he requested. Well, I've been thinking of upgrading my spear. Saying those words, he extended his bloody wooden spear towards the two, prompting expressions of confusion to appear on both Tristan and Mist's faces. What they didn't know was that, all this time, Valyr's wooden spear was still at level 1, which meant that he was 9 levels over the recommended level to wield the weapon. Fortunately, blacksmiths had a method to circumvent that problem, which was more or less one of the reasons why weapon bonds were placed with great importance in the later versions. The solution? Enhancing the weapon. To enhance a weapon was to increase the weapon's recommended level. With that in mind, Valyr was going to increase the weapon's recommended level to his current level, his mind imagining the potential damage he could deal once he had so. Thankfully, I don't need to upgrade basic equipment enhancement right now. All the upgrades to that skill do is just reduce the time it takes for me to increase the weapon's recommended level by 1. Gazing at the battlefield, he noticed how their side was somewhat struggling against the monsters, yet still gained an edge as a whole. Inwardly nodding, he returned his gaze back at the two before him. Well, I think I have enough time to do that. Upgrade your spear? Would upgrading your spear really change anything? After getting over his initial confusion, Tristan wondered if Valyr had a plan in mind. Can't you just change to a better spear instead? On the other hand, Mist didn't know why Valyr continued to use the wooden spear. In response, Valyr scratched his head for a bit before tossing his spear to Tristan. Go ahead and use analysis on it. All right. Although confused, Tristan's eyes gained a light blue tint around them as he stared at the spear Valyr gave him. Soon after, his pupils shrank as he looked back at Valyr with widened eyes, expressing his great bewilderment. You've been wielding something like this all this time. After saying those words, a hint of excitement appeared on Tristan's face as he gave the spear back to Valyr. Soon after, he dashed back towards the entrance of the village, presumably to obtain the forging hammer and knife Valyr requested. Of course, such a drastic change in behavior had left Mist at a loss for words, making her wonder what was so special with the spear Valyr was wielding. Noticing the curiosity still written all over her face, Valyr used analysis on the spear before turning the screen around to face Mist. With that, Mist read through the weapon's description, her eyebrows raised once she noticed that there was something special about it. A weapon bond? Yeah, that's the reason why I haven't changed into a different spear. Valyr nodded in response. I see. Mist went silent for a bit, pondering as to what weapon bonds might be. Eventually realizing she had no clue what they were, she looked back at him, changing the topic of their conversation. What's the reason behind wanting to become a blacksmith? That's something I'd rather keep to myself, sorry. Valyr bitterly smiled. Well, I had a feeling you'd say that. Mist shrugged her shoulders, expecting Valyr to give her answer along those lines. In any case, deciding to upgrade your spear in the middle of battle is an odd decision, to say the least. This won't be the last of those odd decisions. I'll tell you that much. Valyr let out a hearty chuckle in response, only for him to stop as he heard footsteps heading in their direction. Turning around, both Valyr and Mist saw Tristan running as fast as his legs could take him, bringing along with him a somewhat crude forging hammer and a slightly rusty knife. This was the best I could get, considering the current circumstances, Tristan said as he panted, gasping for air. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Valyr. Would this be enough? In response, Valyr nodded with a smile. More than enough. Are you going to upgrade the spear right now? Hearing Valyr's reply, Tristan could not help but ask in response, his body language showing the immense excitement he felt towards what Valyr was going to do. In response, Valyr nodded at his question. Though, the words that came out of Valyr's mouth instantly dampened the mood he felt, causing a slightly sad frown to appear on his face. Yes, I will. After all, we still have more waves we have to complete. Though, I'll be heading to the back of the defensive line to do the upgrade. It would do no good for me to block the passage for those fighting, after all. Is it possible for me to accompany you and watch you do the upgrade? Although he had a glum expression on his face, the expression on Tristan's face quickly changed into that of pleading as he asked Valyr this question. At this point, Mist could not help but look at Tristan weirdly, wondering why the most renowned blacksmith in the village was treating a newcomer this way. Unfortunately for Tristan, Valyr's words once more crushed his hopes as the latter shook his head with an apologetic smile. For now, it'd be better if I do this upgrade on my own. Since this is my first time enhancing a weapon, you might laugh at me during the process. Why would I laugh? Listening to his words, Tristan decided to be assertive one last time. Every blacksmith has to start from somewhere. After all, that's definitely true, but a hint of hesitation appeared on Valyr's face, only to let out a sigh sometime later as he looked at Tristan. Can I do this on my own for now, Tristan? Let me explore the entire process for myself. I promise you can watch the next time I do something like this. Hearing those words, Tristan's hopes were thoroughly crushed, prompting him to let out a sigh as well. After that, a bitter smile appeared on his face before lightly nodding. All right, I won't stop you anymore. Inwardly letting out a sigh of relief, Valyr thanked Tristan before leaving the vicinity, heading towards the rear section of the defensive line. While he did that, Miss could not help but look at the despondent Tristan, wondering what he saw or realized that made him treat Valyr that way. Why were you acting like that toward Valyr? It's so unlike you, Tristan. In response, Tristan flashed Miss a wry smile. Since you're not a blacksmith, you don't understand how important weapon bonds are. Are they really that special? At this point, Miss' interest towards the topic could not help but be piqued. Nodding, Tristan explained, special only scratches the surface of what weapon bonds are. If you were to ask me what I think about weapon bonds, they're probably the difference between victory and defeat. As Miss' eyes slightly widened at those words, Tristan continued to speak. At the first couple levels, the only thing they do is increase the power of the weapon by a certain percentage, which doesn't seem like much in the long run. However, the reason why weapon bonds are considered important is because of their higher levels. Even the lowest rung of those levels is enough to transform a shitty weapon into a weapon capable of writing legends. On top of that, it's incredibly rare for one to come across a weapon bond, especially a weapon bond at the higher levels. Tristan looked at her, his face regaining its earlier vigor. So far, I've only come across 3 weapons that have a weapon bond. The first was a weapon I came across when I was still an apprentice, the second was Damien's sword, and the third, well, that's none other than Valyr's spear. Tristan finished his explanation there. A weapon bond is a strong enough reason for someone like Valyr to stick wooden spear. After all, there are multiple ways to enhance his weapon's capabilities to match his future strength. On the other hand, obtaining a weapon bond is as difficult as finding phoenix feathers, especially the high-level ones. With her now having a bit of knowledge towards the topic, a question soon formed in Miss' mind, prompting her to ask Tristan about it. Do you think I could get a weapon bond as well? In response, Tristan let out a light chuckle. Fortunately for you, you're in the right place for that to happen. And that would be... Miss raised her eyebrow in curiosity, to which Tristan replied by extending his arm out and pointing in the direction where the monsters were. The battlefield. He lightly smiled. While the two were talking about weapon bonds and how to get them, Valyr had finally found an ideal spot for him to do his upgrading, inwardly letting out a sigh of relief. Arriving at the spot, he looked around for a bit, wanting to see whether there were people who might see what he was doing while he was passing through. Thankfully, after a few minutes of surveillance, none of the people that passed by seemed to have noticed his presence at all, allowing his mind to be at ease as he dropped his wooden spear on the ground. Taking out the forging hammer and knife Tristan gave him, Valyr took in a deep breath before trying to recall all of the experiences he had in the past regarding the enhancement of the equipment. Naturally, the reason why he didn't want Tristan to watch him upgrade the weapon was not because he wanted to explore the process of enhancing on his own. Instead, it was because he didn't want him to know that he was well-versed in enhancing equipment. After recalling everything he needed to know about enhancing, Valyr focused his attention towards the spear before him, slightly tightening his grip around the knife before using it to gradually carve the spear's surface. Basic Equipment Enhancement. Ding. Basic Equipment Enhancement, Level 1/10. Rarity, Common. A basic skill any blacksmith should know. This skill allows the user to enhance the recommended level of equipment of their choosing by 1 after a certain interval. Note that the user cannot enhance their equipment to a level exceeding theirs. As if falling into a trance, Valor's eyes darted about the spear's surface, finding any minute imperfections it had before carving it down with the knife he held. Then, at other times, he would place the knife down before picking up the forging hammer, hammering out the imperfections that couldn't be carved out with the knife. Gradually, the speed at which he went through this process increased, eventually reaching a point where his muscle memory took over as he spared a quick glance towards what was happening on the battlefield. Oh, it seems the east and west sections are moving closer to the center section again. Are they finally preparing for the fourth wave? If that's the case, I should hurry up. With that in mind, the speed at which he found and fixed imperfections on his spear sharply increased. Rumble. Coincidentally, by the time he had placed both forging hammer and knife down as he admired his newly upgraded spear, a strong rumble could be felt throughout the area, prompting a light smile to appear on Valor's face as he stood up and affixed the spear behind his back. Pocketing the forging hammer and knife, he soon exerted all of his strength through his feet, zooming through the defensive line as he swiftly made his way to where the east section was now located. I can't wait to test this spear out on the battlefield. I wonder how much damage I'll be dealing by then. After running for quite some time, Valyr had eventually arrived where the east section was now located, gasping for a bit of air once he recognized a couple of familiar people appeared in his field of vision. While he was catching his breath, Mist came up to him, prompting Valyr to look back at her before giving her a quick thumbs up. Nodding in response, she then told Valyr to follow her, only for the two of them to stop near the boundary of the east section's defensive line. Letting out a light sigh, Mist looked at Valyr with an expression of relief written all over her face. To be honest, I thought you wouldn't make it in time before the fourth wave. In response, Valyr looked at the battlefield in front of them, quickly noticing that only a couple dozen monsters remained to be slain before the fourth wave would begin. With that in mind, he could not help but inwardly let out a sigh of relief that he finished his upgrade in time. Well, I thought I wouldn't make it in time either. Hearing that, a light smile appeared on Mist's face for a bit, only for it to disappear as she stared at the battlefield solemnly. I know this might sound grating to the ears, but we'll be the ones making a move for the fourth wave. Just the two of us again? Valyr raised his eyebrow. Mist shook her head in response. Although us two will be moving again, we'll be accompanied by everyone else who's at rank 1. Turning around to look at who would accompany them, Mist could not help but scratch her head before letting out a sigh. Then again, the number of people in the village that have a rank 1 class are only in the low double digits, around 30 or so. Add on the fact that all of them have to work in groups of 3 against the upcoming wave, will probably be making the most difference again. It sucks that our forces are being stretched thin, but we have to make do with what we have. After Mist was finished saying those words, silence covered their surroundings, which made Valyr uncomfortable for some reason. Retrieving the spear behind his back, he decided to take a look and see how everyone was faring while also being mindful of the progress on the battlefield. In an instant, it quickly stood out to him that almost everyone behind the defensive line had somber expressions on their faces. Whether it was those up in line to fight the monsters against the fourth wave, or those who had just returned from fighting the monsters in the third wave, all of them seemed despondent, as if they had accepted something before it even had the chance to happen. What's with the somber mood? Curious, Valyr decided to ask Mist beside him. Surprisingly, in response to the question, Mist gave him a bitter smile. Right? I almost forgot this is the first time you're helping the village out against a monster tide. Well, to answer your question, the fourth wave is when the village's forces are finally spread out so thin that monsters inevitably pass through the battlefield and finally deal considerable damage to the village. She let out a light sigh. Then again, we don't really have anything to stop it from happening. Those who have the strength to deal with the fourth wave are out in the battlefield, while those staying behind the defensive line are all weaker than the monsters who barge through. We could have those at the defensive line give it their all to make sure the village doesn't get hit, but that would just mean piling up sacrifices that could have been avoided in the first place. Mist looked at Valyr. It's easier to replace broken parts of the village than find more people to defend the village, after all. Though, that doesn't mean we've accepted the fact that we're helpless against the fourth wave and the waves after that. Not even one bit. As she said those words, a faint killing intent emanated from her, slowly unsheathing her blade. We're still going to give it our all to kill every monster we can, for the sake of the village. After listening to Miss' words, Valyr could not help but grip tightly on his wooden spear, his mind wondering whether his presence in this village was helping reduce the damage the village received from the monster tide. After all, he was only one person. There was only so much he could do with his current level of strength, something he took pride in, but knew that it wouldn't change how the village fared that much by the end of the tide. Just as the doubts in his mind intensified regarding his participation in the defense against the tide, Valyr looked at the people behind him, noticing that some of them were looking at him. From their gazes alone, he quickly felt that these people had placed all of their trust that he would try his best to defend the village from the fourth wave's monsters as much as possible. Of course, he was not the only recipient of this kind of gaze. Mist, Tristan, Damien, everyone who had a rank 1 class all felt these gazes behind their back, feeling as if multiple intangible hands were pushing on their back, prompting them to move forward. Realizing this, Valyr looked at his upgraded wooden spear before shifting his gaze to the battlefield. Focusing his attention on the next wave of monsters that he and the others would be fighting against, he took in a deep breath before letting out a light sigh, a killing intent gradually emanating around him. Men, as the fourth wave is looming before us, it's time for us to make adequate preparations. As the number of monsters in the battlefield was now less than 10, Mist, as well as the leaders of the other 2 sections, decided to prepare for the upcoming wave, knowing that their next fight's goal was to reduce as much damage the village took as possible. All of those near and at the limit of rank 0. You'll be making us the first line of defense for this section. Group yourselves up into 4 and attack any monster that passes through the defensive line. However, don't be foolish to sacrifice your life for just one monster. If you feel like you're no match for it, let it ram against the village walls before attacking it from the back. Mist's voice was stern, prompting everyone who heard it to listen to her commands. Those that aren't included in the first line of defense, I commend your bravery to still be here. You shall make up the second line of defense. Your goal is to aid the first line in killing any monster that passes by as quickly as possible. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am. Multiple voices responded to her question in unison. The somber atmosphere surrounded them just a while ago now gone. Instead, what replaced it was a feeling of immense determination, a determination to make sure that their village wouldn't succumb to the tyranny of the monster tide. Nodding in satisfaction, Mist then focused her gaze on the ones who would be accompanying her and Valyr into the battlefield. As for you guys, you'll be grouping yourselves up into 3 against the monsters. Just like what I've said earlier, don't be foolish to sacrifice your life for just one monster. If you know you can't fight against it, just retreat. Am I clear? Yes, ma'am. Unlike before, only a few voices responded in unison to Mist's question. Nevertheless, the unyielding feeling from before was still there. Once she was done talking, Mist spared a glance towards Valyr, who nodded back at her in response. Seeing that, she took in a deep breath before looking at the others, nodding at them before starting to make her way to the battlefield. Naturally, the others followed suit, accompanying her as all of them stared at the monsters they were up against, knowing that they had to give it beyond their all. Advance! Roar! As a couple dozen people in total emerged from the 3 sections defending the village, a loud roar resounded from the far end of the other side of the battlefield, a faint rumble accompanying it. Within seconds, a great number of monsters charged in the direction of the village, all of them emanating auras far greater than those in the third wave had. It went without saying that their goal was the same, wanting nothing more than to destroy the village and reduce it to fine rubble. Seeing as the monsters had finally made a move, the people that had entered the battlefield quickly went their own ways, with a great portion of them moving forward in a group of 3. Of course, as someone capable of dishing out a great amount of damage, Valyr was one of those who moved out on his own, quickly clashing against a monster in the battlefield soon after. Bang! -30. Thrusting his spear forward, he instantly stopped the momentum of the monster he had chosen as his target. Naturally, this enraged the monster, lunging forward to attack Valyr in response. However, before its attack could even land, Valyr sidestepped and utilized the entirety of his AGI to move to the monster's abdomen, slashing out with spear in a cross pattern soon after. -26. -23. With its attention caught by the pain coming from its abdomen out of nowhere, the monster hastily turned around, only for it to stand still soon after as it felt something poke through its neck. Poochie. -78. Just as the monster was about to turn its head around to see what had dealt the final blow to it, all of the light in its eyes quickly dimmed as its body soon limped to the ground without making much sound. Ding! With a 3-level disparity between the user and the opponent, the amount of experience obtained shall be increased by 60%. You have slain a level 13 Tide monster. You have gained 523 XP. So the fourth wave is made up of monsters at level 13. Huh? Valyr murmured to himself, closing the notification screen in front of him before finding another target to fight against. Though, unlike the first monster he had killed, which seemed slow to keep up with his actions, the monster he currently fought against seemed to have greater agility, allowing it to dodge Valyr's attacks, albeit barely. Of course, realizing this, Valyr knew that there was no point in continuing the fight, stopping in his tracks before sending out a quick thrust to the monster's skull. Strong pierce. Bang. -263. Before the monster could even react to his sudden attack, its head had burst open and exploded into chunks of flesh and blood. Not long after, its headless body fell to the ground with a thud, eliciting a hint of fear to appear within the monsters surrounding the two earlier as they witnessed this sight. Ding! With a 4-level disparity between the user and the opponent, the amount of experience obtained shall be increased by 80%. You have slain a level 14 Tide monster. You have gained 780 XP. Make that level 13 and level 14. Valyr revised his earlier hypothesis, his body continuing to move as he fought against monsters that entered his field of vision. As those in the battlefield continued to fight against the monsters of the fourth wave, a couple monsters eventually slipped through them, madly dashing towards the village in a bid to destroy it. Seeing this, those at the defensive line got their weapons ready and met up with the rogue monsters at a moment's notice, making sure to prioritize their safety first before attacking. At first, those at the defensive line had no problems defending against the monsters that had slipped through the cracks, with a great portion of them already having reduced HP by the time they arrived by the defensive line. Unfortunately, as time passed, more and more monsters got past the battlefield, gradually overwhelming the defensive line as they fought monsters at full HP. Eventually, one of the monsters had gotten past the defensive lines that were set up and rammed against the village walls, finally dealing damage to the village. Of course, just like how the defensive line was getting overwhelmed, more and more monsters slipped past the defensive line and rammed against the village walls, with their collective efforts eventually destroying a portion of the village walls. Naturally, the monsters in the battlefield quickly noticed this, instilling them with great vigor as they fought against those in the battlefield with greater speed and power behind every back. This, in turn, allowed more monsters to get past the battlefield as they joined their comrades in destroying more of the village. Hey, Damien, aren't we going to make a move yet? While that was happening, a man in the center section looked at the man beside him, only to jump above a charging monster before landing a barrage of punches on its head, effectively killing it. Just wait for a bit more, Tristan. We haven't reached the point of no return yet. In response, the latter looked back at the former before dashing past the defensive line for a bit. Soon after, the man unsheathed his sword before running along the side of a rampaging monster, sending a flurry of slashes on its abdomen. Swoosh! At the very instant the monster took another step, a great amount of blood burst out from the side of its abdomen, causing it to fall to the ground on its side as its consciousness eventually disappeared. Hearing Damien's words, Tristan could not help but let out a sigh before shaking his head. Looking back to take a look at how the defensive line was faring, he then moved to where Damien was. Are you seriously only going to make a move once the situation looked dire? Our defensive line is already on the losing end, Damien. We should be helping them out since we're still here. Do you really want to make meaningless sacrifices? Of course I don't. Damien shook his head in response. Though, not long after, he flashed a light grin at Tristan. But, regarding the problem with the defensive line, we're not the ones going to take care of it. Clap, clap. Clapping his hands twice, Damien shifted his attention towards the defensive line, prompting Tristan to take a look as well, wondering what the former was planning. Fortunately for Tristan, it did not take long for him to find it out, noticing that a great number of monsters previously ramming against the village walls had already fallen to the ground with a thud. Whoosh! Within minutes, the burden on those manning the defensive line hastily lessened, allowing them to allocate more attention towards the rogue monsters that appeared before them. At that point, Tristan was greatly curious as to what had just happened, looking at Damien to see if the latter would tell him. In response to the gaze he was getting, Damien could only shrug his shoulders. I just had a few rank 1 class holders wait near the defensive line, that's all. Anyways, while the defensive line is not having much of a problem in the meantime, we should help out those fighting against the 4th wave. Saying that, Damien flashed a smile at Tristan. You asked me if I was only going to make a move if the situation seemed dire, right? Well, taking a look at the great number of monsters that had slipped past the battlefield, making their way towards the village, a strong killing intent emanated from Damien as he licked his lips. Consider the current situation dire enough. Whoosh! Without hesitation, Damien madly dashed towards one of the rogue monsters, landing a flurry of slashes on the monster's body before moving onto the next one. Seeing this, Tristan could not help but shake his head, acting cool as always in front of me. Then again, Tristan grinned, coming face to face with a rogue monster before sending out a punch that sent the monster flying. It's not like I don't enjoy it, either. Strong pierce. Bang. Minus 158. One more down. Still a hell of a lot more to go. As Valyr activated his skill, cleanly piercing through a nearby monster's throat, he could not help but let out a sigh as he retracted his spear. Although he had already killed his fair share of monsters for this wave, the number of monsters in the battlefield were still in the hundreds, even after considering the fact that a portion of them had gotten past their grasp and ran towards the village walls. Unfortunately, even Valyr could not avoid a couple monsters in his field of vision from getting past him. These monsters would get past him through a various number of ways, though the most common way for them to pass through was to take advantage of the time where Valyr was preoccupied with fighting other monsters. There were also those who had gotten past him by relying on their insanely high AGI stat, though that was something he did not have control over anymore. In any case, I wouldn't be having such an easy time fighting against these monsters if I hadn't upgraded the spear. With that in mind, Valyr went ahead and used analysis on his wooden spear, the results of which appeared in his mind as his body moved to fight against the nearest monster to him. Ding! Wooden spear, level 10. Rarity, common. Weapon bond. LV, 1 Valyr. Attack, 11 to 18, plus 10%. A spear given to those newly enlisted with the village guards of Astardo village, being deemed by most people as a training weapon until one could afford a proper weapon. Nevertheless, the material it is made of and the level of attention to it allows it to keep up in battle somewhat. An apprentice blacksmith has upgraded it to a considerably high level, allowing it to unleash more damage and withstand more strain. As the user has continued to use the spear, even though they have already outgrown it, traces of a soul have awakened inside the spear, allowing it to somewhat grow to meet the needs of the user. Remarks: I know what you're trying to do, but you're still stupid. Although the increase in damage after upgrading the wooden spear to level 10 did not seem that substantial, Valyr knew that the true effects of upgrading the spear would only appear whenever he used an active skill, such as strong pierce. Unlike basic attacks, wherein a random value within the range of the weapon's attack stat was pulled, any active skill utilized the maximum attack value of the weapon in terms of calculating damage. Of course, because of this fact, many people in Valyr's past life would often collect weapons that had abysmal ranges for their attack stat, their goal being to use them for their maximum attack value when activating skills. In fact, a new playstyle was born because of it, with the people who utilized the new playstyle being known as skill mages, known for their insane damage output when it came to active skills. Their only caveat was their basic attacks, which greatly varied depending on how abysmal the range of damage their weapon dealt. While continuing to fight against the monsters, with most of them falling down just from one strong pierce, Valyr could not help but redirect his attention towards the monsters who had gotten past the other people in the battlefield. Though all of them were already trying their hardest to make sure none of the monsters got past them, he still could not help but feel disappointed. If only I was fast enough to catch up to those that got past, that would be great. Swoosh! As if his inner thoughts were being answered by a higher being, a couple people were speedily making their way through the area that separated one from the defensive line to the battlefield, killing all of the monsters they passed through within a couple of hits. Naturally, Valyr's eyes could not help but widen at this sight, wondering who these strong people were. Of course, he also wondered why they've only made a move now, thinking that a great portion of the monsters that had gotten past could have been stopped from damaging the village walls beforehand. Though, once the two had gotten closer to the battlefield, Valyr finally realized who the two were, feeling a bit more hope that they had a chance at successfully defending against the fourth wave. Tristan and Damien, they're finally making a move. Analysis: with how effortless their moves were in killing monsters, as well as the fact that the two of them were speedily moving through the battlefield, Valyr could not stop himself from identifying their stats, only to be left aghast a moment later. Ding! Damien Waters, level 25. Class: Sword Dancer, rank 1, uncommon. Subclass: Guard Leader, uncommon. HP: 900 of 900. MP: 348 for 348. Stats: 75 VIT, 91 STR, 82 AGI, 92 DX, 29 INT, 29 WIS, 47 PR, 25 LUK. Remarks: why bother thinking you can fight this one? Being jolted back to reality by the roar of monsters near him, Valyr focused his attention on the monsters in front of him before relying on his muscle memory to fight them. After all, what he had just seen had shocked him to his core. I know I've seen my fair share of high stats in the past, but 3 stats that are near 100 at rank 1? Valyr inwardly exclaimed in shock, knowing very well how hard it was to achieve such feat if one didn't rely on something like the reinforcement elixirs. On top of that, both his class and subclass are uncommon grade. Subclasses were something that could only be obtained once one had ascended to a rank 1 class. Aside from the fact that subclasses allowed one to gain access to more skills than what their class could give them, subclasses also gave a certain number of attributes every time one increased their level, the amount of which relied on the rarity of the class they had, as well as the rarity of the subclass they had. For an uncommon grade subclass, one would gain 30% of the attributes one would obtain per level from their class, although it would be distributed differently. For comparison, a common grade subclass would only give 120% of the attributes per level, while a mythic grade subclass would effectively double the attributes gained by a player per level. As for Tristan, with that in mind, he redirected his attention towards the screen that corresponded to Tristan, his pupils shrinking after finding out his subclass. He actually has that subclass. Ding! Tristan Melfon, level 26. Class: Experienced Blacksmith, rank 2. Subclass: Battle Junkie rare. HP: 1230/1230. MP: 810/810. Stats: 82 VIT, 74 STR, 68 AGI, 110 DX, 54 INT, 26 WIS, 29 PR, 26 LUK. Remarks: ever wanted to meet the Grim Reaper? So that's why he described his subclass back then that way. Now it makes sense. Letting out a light sigh, Valyr closed all of the screens in his mind as he refocused his attention towards the monsters before him. As a rare subclass, Tristan was able to obtain 50% of the attributes he would gain from his class per level, which Valyr was certain that it was the reason his DX stat had surpassed the 100-point mark. However, what interested him even more was the subclass itself. After all, if his mind served him correctly, the Battle Junkie subclass also had another name in his past life: the Berserker. Then again, obtaining the Battle Junkie subclass only gives one the ideology of the Berserker for the most part, not the skills itself. Valyr recalled a moment in his past life where everyone was trying to obtain the Battle Junkie subclass due to the fact that it allowed one to adopt a more free-form fighting style. In their minds, not being limited by the weapons they wielded were a great boon, only to realize later on that it would hamper their progress in finding a suitable fighting style. Of course, the Berserker class also existed, which was considered a rare grade class by the game, a class that heavily leaned on a playstyle that allowed one to deal more damage the longer they fought. It could be said that the Berserker class and the Battle Junkie subclass were a match made in heaven, with the subclass allowing the class to show far greater power than normal, allowing the class to transcend its original grade. In fact, Valyr could recall that there was a player who had both the Berserker class and the Battle Junkie subclass in his past life. Once that player had ascended to the next class rank, he had evolved his class to the true Berserker class, a class that was not just one grade above his original class, but two, being classified as a legendary class. I wonder if that player will do the same thing this time around, considering that I've been brought back to before the beta version even began. Placing this thought at the back of his head, Valyr continued to fight against the monsters, relying on the lethality of strong peers to reduce the burden on himself, as well as the defensive line far behind him. Are we anywhere near finishing the fourth wave? Valyr could not help but mutter to himself, his breathing ragged as he sent his spear towards a monster's throat, effectively killing it in one hit. Seeing that the number of monsters in his area had thinned out quite a bit, he decided to take a rest for a while, sitting down on ground that hadn't been tainted with blood yet. Taking in a deep breath, he took a look at the sky, only realizing just then that they had been fighting nonstop for many hours already as the sun had already gone past its zenith. Accompanying that realization, Valyr's stomach slightly rumbled, which elicited a sigh to escape from its mouth as he rubbed it for a bit. Standing up after feeling that he had rested enough, he gripped his spear before running for a bit to find the ideal target. However, just as he was about to lunge forward to attack a certain monster, a certain being had beaten him to the punch, sending the monster flying on its side as it knocked over multiple monsters as collateral. What the? Taking a look to see who the person who stole his target was, Valyr's eyes could not help but widen in slight surprise as he had never expected this person to appear before him. Tristan, yo! In response, Tristan waved back at him and cheekily smiled. I thought you were having difficulty with the monsters in the area, so I decided to help out a bit. Anyways, how are you holding up? As he said that, Tristan charged toward the couple monsters, sending them flying with a single blow each. Because of that, the burden on Valyr and the others in the vicinity had significantly lessened. Well, I'm getting by, I guess. Valyr shrugged his shoulders at the question. Then again, it's not like I could turn tail and return to the village. You could, but the people in the village definitely won't like it. Tristan joked, prompting a wry smile to appear on Valyr's face. In any case, if you were wondering where Damien is, he's at another part of the battlefield, currently helping the others clear this wave as quickly as possible. Is there really a need to? Valyr asked, gazing far beyond the battlefield to see that there were no wave of monsters waiting for them. There doesn't seem to be a fifth wave, though. For now, that might be the case. Tristan nodded in response. But soon after, his expression turned solemn. However, if we don't finish this wave quickly enough, we might have to fight against a few more waves instead of having the next one as the final wave. Just so you know, we're ill-equipped to fight against the former. The final wave? Isn't this already the final wave? Tilting his head in confusion, Valyr looked at Tristan. In response, Tristan shook his head before pointing far beyond the battlefield. I wish it was. Looking in the direction where Tristan was pointing, Valyr only saw a large yet faint silhouette at first. Though, as he continued to utilize more and more of his perception, he eventually saw the silhouette in its entirety, his mouth becoming slack-jawed as he could not help but look at Tristan. Where we're fighting against something like that? We are. Tristan slowly nodded as he lightly sighed. Hearing his response, Valyr redirected his attention once more towards the entity on the other far end of the battlefield, as Tristan took the initiative to fight the monsters surrounding them. From what he could see, the entity looked similar to a spider, but was hundreds of times larger in every aspect. If he were to hazard a guess, he would estimate that the entity was around 40 to 50 meters tall. Not only that, but multiple orifices could be seen on its underside, giving Valyr the feeling that they had a specific purpose as to why they were on the entity's body. After looking at it for a bit, he decided to use analysis on it from afar, wondering if the skill would even register his usage. Fortunately, the skill did activate, giving him information within his mind regarding the entity he saw from afar. But of course, the information he had received was not in any way good at the very least. Ding! Lesser Tide Mother, Rare Elite, Level 25. HP, 2500/2500. Remarks, don't you even think about it. Reading through the information, Valyr could not help but sharply inhale a great amount of air. Aside from the fact that it was 15 levels above his own, it was classified as a rare elite by the system. Unlike elites and uncommon elites, which could be found in leveling areas if one looked hard enough, rare elites were existences that would only be commonly found in places where monsters were in their most ferocious state. Dungeons. Finally feeling the gravitas and the importance of how they needed to clear the current wave as soon as possible, Valyr went ahead and charged against a monster, shamelessly utilizing strong pierce to increase the speed at which he killed it. Now that's what I'm talking about. Finally being able to see the sight from up close, Tristan could not help but give Valyr a thumbs up as he chuckled, landing a ferocious kick on a monster's face soon after. Scree! Just as the two were about to engage with another monster, a loud screech pervaded throughout the entire battlefield, bringing everything to an abrupt halt as everyone looked at the entity from afar, noticing that it was gradually getting closer to where they were. Well, shit, Tristan cursed all of a sudden. The Tide Mother's pissed. It seems we'll have to part ways once more, Valyr. As Tristan said those words, a solemn expression could be seen on his face as his body started to radiate a faint red light. Soon after, his eyes gained a slight crimson hue to them, making him seem as if he were going to go berserk at any time. Battle mania, whoosh! At the very moment he had uttered the name of the skill, the red light surrounding him instantly intensified, transforming into a billowing flame that gave off the feeling that it could burn anyone who touched it. I'm sure Damien will say something later, but let me give you a head start. Cracking his knuckles, Tristan eyed the monsters that he would target, licking his lips before letting out a slight maniacal grin as he spared a quick glance towards Valyr. Fight like your life depends on it. Swoosh! Bang! 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 Utilizing his stats to its maximum potential, Tristan seemingly disappeared within Valyr's field of vision, appearing a second later beside the head of a monster before punching it off not long after. As the monster's decapitated head flew in the air for a while, a string of red energy came out of the headless body, which Tristan surprisingly absorbed as the aura emanating from him experienced a slight increase. Lightly cackling, he continued to land attacks on any monsters he chose to target, the power he exuded gradually becoming more terrifying the more monsters he killed. Watching this scene unfold from afar, Valyr could not help but let out a sigh of awe as he wryly smiled soon after. Gripping tightly onto his spear, he then eyed the monsters in his surroundings, eventually choosing one as he gave it a swift death through strong pierce. Well, I can see why Tristan chose to get Battle Junkie as his subclass. But with him activating Battle Mania, it seems we're going for one more push before the final bout. Realizing this, Valyr took in a deep breath as his eyes gained a slight chill to them. From this point onwards, he was going to contribute as much as an anomalous level 10 being like him could in this wave. After all, the fight with the Tide Mother was still something way out of his league. Thud! 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 While everyone was still engaged in battle against the monsters in their vicinity, some of them cursing out that some monsters in their grasp had escaped, the large entity at the other end of the battlefield had finally started to move, taking steps closer to the battlefield where Valyr and the others were. Noticing this, Tristan sharply inhaled air as his attacks were sent out at a greater speed for an instant, quickly killing all the monsters in his surroundings. Then, while still in the process of whittling down the number of monsters in the battlefield, he mustered up the loudest voice he could, directing his message towards the other person who had accompanied him. "Hey, Damien, the Tide Mother's starting to move. I know, you don't have to tell me." In response to his words, Tristan received a loud snarl from another side of the battlefield, eliciting a light smile to appear on his face as he continued to kill more monsters. On the other hand, the recipient of Tristan's words could not help but let out a long sigh before shaking his head. Nevertheless, Damien knew that Tristan wouldn't just say those words out of nowhere, prompting him to take a look at the horizon beyond the battlefield, confirming that the entity known as the Tide Mother was indeed making its way to where they were. Getting into a battle stance, Damien took a deep inhale as his sword started to shimmer a faint blue light on its surface. Leaning his body a bit more, he then darted toward the monster, inflicting a long yet deep gash on its abdomen before moving to the monster adjacent to it, ducking before landing a brutal slash across its throat. Flowing sword dance. Thud, thud. While he continued to move throughout the battlefield, his every slash rendering a monster incapable of fighting any further, his voice soon echoed to the far ends of the area as he bellowed out, "Men, heed my words. Increase your killing speed. Go all out. This next move shall dictate whether our village lives to see another day, or if it crumbles under the wrath of the Tide Mother." Hearing the word Tide Mother enter their ears, almost everyone in the battlefield slightly shuddered for a bit. Though, in exchange, the speed at which they fought against their enemies experienced a sharp increase, their minds thinking that they needed to follow Damien's words, lest they wanted to witness the wrath of the Tide Mother firsthand. And so, with Tristan employing Battle Mania, Damien employing Flowing Sword Dance, and most of the people on the battlefield spurred on by Damien's words, the number of monsters on the battlefield quickly reduced in a matter of minutes. At that moment, most of them did not care whether their bodies felt like it was on the verge of breaking. In their minds, there was no other goal than to kill the monsters making up the wave as soon as possible. Fortunately for those fighting in the battlefield, the speed at which the Tide Mother moved towards where they were was negligible. Though it was able to cross a great distance due to its massive body, the distance separating the two of them negated this advantage. Of course, those in the battlefield took advantage of this, rendering all monsters unable to continue fighting just as the Tide Mother was only a quarter of the way to where they were. As each and every one on the battlefield let out cheers of joy, as well as sighs of relief after finally being able to clear the fourth wave, Damien commanded everyone to congregate to where he was. By the time a couple minutes had passed, everyone who had been tasked to fight in the front lines had appeared before him, their appearances at various levels of dishevelment. Looking at those who had sacrificed their time and energy to help the village in defending against the monster tides so far, Damien thanked each and every one of them, prompting smiles to appear on the faces of the others, no matter how tired they felt or how battered they were. As we've cleared this wave quickly enough, the only remaining enemy we have to face against until we successfully clear the monster tide is the Tide Mother heading our way. Listening to Damien's words, almost everyone looked far beyond the battlefield, noticing the massive spider-like entity gradually make its way to where they were with every passing step. However, knowing that Damien still had more to say, they redirected their attention back to him. However, what they did not expect were the next few words that came out of his mouth. "Since you've all worked hard so far, although it may be difficult for us, we would understand if you choose to return to the village and aid those in the defensive lines instead. Of course, should you choose to remain here and help us fight against the Tide Mother, we'd highly appreciate that. You'll given a couple minutes to make your choice before Tristan and I move to face the Tide Mother." Saying those words, the entire surroundings went silent for a bit. Everyone in that area looked at each other for a while in silence, the gazes they gave each other unsure as to whether they would leave or stay. Though, as time passed, the gazes in everyone's eyes eventually leaned toward a certain decision. A decision that made Damien gave the others a rare smile. "I see you've made a decision," he said with a nod, noticing that not even one among them had made the decision to leave. Even Valyr, which he wouldn't be surprised if the latter decided to leave, was still there, his gaze filled with determination just like the others. Turning around to look at the Tide Mother with a solemn expression, Damien then turned back to face the others, an intent to kill the Tide Mother brewing within him. "This shall be our final bout. I don't know whether all of us would be able to leave unscathed, but I will do my utmost to make sure everyone can return to the village safe and sound. For now, lend me your strength. Let's fight to live another day," he exclaimed. "To live another day," everyone exclaimed back in unison. As Damien allowed everyone to take a rest for the meantime, all of them stared at the Tide Mother heading their way, feeling a hint of trepidation at the idea that they were going to fight against something like this. Nevertheless, as they had decided to stay with Damien and the others in the fight against the Tide Mother, they would see to it till the bitter end. Finally being able to catch his breath, Valyr could not help but lie down on the ground, gazing at the sky for a bit as he gathered his thoughts. Although his body had already gone past the point of being drained of energy, for some reason, he felt like he could still tap into a source of energy deep inside his body to continue fighting. Then again, since I've pushed myself far beyond my limits, I'm sure the quest will reciprocate that. Thinking about this, he brought up a screen in front of him containing information on the emergency quest related to the monster tide. Looking at the number of kills he had racked up so far, a light smile could not help but appear on his face, pondering as to how he was going to spend his rewards once everything was done. Ding! Number of kills, 272 out of 1,000. Just as he closed the screen in front of him and closed his eyes, wanting to relax his mind for a bit before the final bout against the Tide Mother, something blocked the sunlight over his face all of a sudden. Opening his eyes, he was greeted by the sight of Damien looking back at him, which prompted him to get up. "What's up, Damien?" "Not much." Seeing Valyr stand up, Damien told him that he could remain seated if he wanted to. "I just wanted to thank you for helping out the village in defending against the monster tide, even though you didn't really have to. Once all of this is over, the village will make sure to properly reward you." "Well, it's not like I'm not getting anything out of it at all." Valyr chuckled in response. "The rewards I've accumulated from the emergency quest so far is enough for me to buy a lot of stuff from the contribution shop. Perhaps I could even kit myself out with better gear with the points I'll get. Either way, you still deserve to be rewarded." Damien shrugged his shoulders. "Among those in the village guards, you are probably the one closest to embodying the true purpose of it. Tell me, what made you decide to help the village out in defending against the monster tide?" Hearing that, Valyr thought about it for a bit and decided to say that he did it more or less for the rewards he would obtain from the quest. Though, as he pondered over it for a bit more, he could not help but find it a bit peculiar that he had accepted the request outright when Damien asked him to participate back then. Now that I think about it, what made me accept the request in the first place aside from the rewards? Fortunately for him, it did not take long for him to find the answer, his expression turning solemn, only to turn slightly glum soon after. In his mind, memories of their side losing the final battle surfaced, making him realize that he had decided to accept the quest as a way to remind himself of the past. It was as if he had joined the defense against the monster tide to cope with the loss. Nevertheless, delving deeper into his reasons behind joining also made him realize that he had joined it because he knew he had the strength to actually make a change in the outcome of the tide. "I only revealed my full strength near the end of the final battle. If I revealed it from the start, the outcome might have changed. Well, there's no point thinking about the past." Focusing on his train of thought, Valyr could not help but laugh inwardly. "There's nothing I can change about that. But now, since I have the strength to make a positive change, why not use it? Let's just say I've got a couple of reasons in mind." Consolidating all his thoughts, Valyr eventually opened his mouth to respond to Damien's words. "Plus, Astardo village has done nothing but treat me well, so think of it as a way for me to give back to the village. Now that everyone has gotten sufficient amounts of rest, we'll be assigning roles to everyone before we fight against the Tide Mother." Clapping his hands, Damien attracted everyone's attention, prompting everyone to stop what they were doing and focus on what he had to say. First, Tristan and Rampart, you'll be our tanks. Tristan will be the main tank, while Rampart will be the sub-tank. Hearing those words, Tristan nodded in response, as well as another man that Valyr recognized. Rampart was the name of the man who fought with the greatsword beside him during the third wave. Lithia, you'll be the mage. As for Malek, you'll be the healer. Saying those words, Damien shifted his gaze towards two people, a mature woman in her 30s that radiated the pure feeling of mana around her, as well as a young man in his late 20s that looked to be a devout believer of a religion. If not for the fact that both of them currently wore tattered clothes soaked in a mix of their own blood and monster blood, one would not think that these two people would be able to fill in those roles. Mist, you and I shall act as mid-range DPS. Damien looked at Mist, who looked back at him before nodding. These 6 people shall make up the main striking force against the Tide Mother. Are there any questions? As Damien looked around to see if there were any complaints, his eyes slightly widened when he noticed that Valyr raised his hand. Yes, Valyr. Is it possible for me to be part of the main striking force? Valyr asked in response, prompting almost everyone there to look back at him with a hint of curiosity. Unfortunately for him, Damien shook his head. Unfortunately, the level gap between you and the Tide Mother is too large. I know you're able to dish great amounts of damage, but in front of a level gap that wide, that damage becomes moot. I understand. Rather than get angry at the fact he couldn't participate, Valyr nodded, clenching his fist as he inwardly cursed his lack of strength. Once this monster tide is over, I should ascend to rank 1 as soon as possible. Nodding in response to Valor's words, Damien then returned his attention to everyone. Now, for those whose names haven't been called, you shall be making up the quick response team. Your task is to exterminate each and every minion the Tide Mother spawns. Do I make myself clear? Sir, yes, sir. Unsurprisingly, everyone exclaimed in unison, some of them letting out inward sighs of relief from the fact that they wouldn't be the ones fighting against the Tide Mother. Although the Tide Mother's minions were also a nuisance to deal with, in their minds, they were far easier to handle. With that, Damien ordered the 5 people he had called out earlier to move forward as everyone beeline for the Tide Mother ahead of them. Move forth,